Welcome back to another story on DC Harry. This time, we're bringing you, what if Supergirl rescued Harry from Dursleys at age 6 and Kryptonian girl fell for wizard boy creating power couple of two worlds. Your likes fuel our creativity. Subscribe and stay tuned. Here's the story. Chapter 1, The sound no one else heard. The thing about Kara Danvers, Kara Zor-El, when she was being honest with herself, was that she heard everything. Not metaphorically. Not in the way people said it when they meant someone was a good listener. She meant it literally, the way only someone with Kryptonian physiology could mean it. She heard the couple 3 streets over arguing about money. She heard the old man on Elm Avenue talking to his dead wife's photograph. She heard traffic on highways 40 miles away and birds adjusting their wings in the thermals above clouds she was currently flying through at 400 miles per hour. Most of the time, she'd gotten good at filtering. Clark had taught her that, or tried to, anyway. Build walls, he'd said. Learn to tune it out or it'll drive you crazy. He'd learned the hard way, he said. She'd believed him and spent 2 years building those mental walls brick by careful brick until the world's noise became something manageable, a river she stood beside rather than drowned in. But walls had gaps. And on a warm Tuesday evening in late July of 1986, somewhere over Surrey, England, a sound slipped through one of those gaps and hit her like a fist. It was a child crying. Not the ordinary kind. Not a tantrum or a scraped knee or a nightmare. She'd heard thousands of those and learned, with some guilt, to let most of them pass, because she couldn't be everywhere and Clark had told her that too. You'll burn yourself out trying to answer every cry, he'd said. Be strategic. Be sustainable. This was different. This was the specific, exhausted kind of crying that a child produces when they've stopped believing anyone is coming. The kind that doesn't have an audience anymore. The kind a person does alone in the dark when crying has stopped being a call for help and becomes simply the only thing left to do. Kara stopped flying. She hovered, 2,000 feet above the Surrey countryside, and she listened. A boy. Small. The heartbeat was fast but weak, the particular rhythm of someone who hadn't eaten enough. She could hear him breathing in shallow bursts, hear the occasional hiccup that came after long crying, hear the faint sound of his body shifting against something wooden and confined. And underneath all of it, barely audible, she could hear him whispering something. She dropped lower, filtering out everything else, focusing down like a telescope narrowing its aperture. It's okay, it'll be okay. He was saying it to himself. Over and over, the way children repeat things when they're trying to make them true through sheer repetition. Kara was moving before she'd made a conscious decision to move. She tracked the sound to a perfectly ordinary street, Privet Drive, the sign said, in a neighborhood so determinedly normal it was almost aggressive about it, and landed in a shadow between 2 hedges, folding her cape with practiced efficiency and scanning the row of identical houses. Number 4. The crying was coming from inside. Specifically, from what her X-ray vision revealed to be a cupboard under the main staircase, a space barely large enough for the hot water pipes that ran through it, let alone a child. But there was a child in there. A small one. Dark-haired, knees pulled to his chest, wearing clothing that was comically too large for his frame, eyes red and swollen behind a pair of cracked glasses held together with what looked like a strip of masking tape. She saw the lock on the outside of the cupboard door. There was a lock on the outside of the cupboard door. Kara felt something go very cold and very still inside her chest. She'd felt that specific coldness before, over war zones, over natural disasters, over scenes of human cruelty that still managed to surprise her no matter how long she'd lived on this planet. It wasn't anger yet. Anger came after. First came this, a quiet, crystalline certainty about what was happening and what she was going to do about it. She walked up the front path and knocked on the door. A large man opened it. Very large, actually, wide as a wardrobe, with a thick neck and small eyes that assessed her the way a person might assess something they'd found on the bottom of their shoe. Behind him, a pale woman with a long neck and sharp features appeared in the hallway, and a boy roughly the same age as the child in the cupboard peered around the corner from what appeared to be a living room, holding a biscuit and staring. "Can I help you?" the large man said, in the tone that actually meant go away. "I'd like to speak with you about the child you have locked in your cupboard," Kara said pleasantly. The man's face went red. The woman made a sharp sound. Kara watched them exchange a rapid glance, the specific glance of people recalibrating, deciding which lie to lead with. "We don't know what the cupboard under your stairs," Kara said, equally pleasantly. "The one with the lock on the outside. The boy inside it who hasn't eaten since," she paused, listening to his heartbeat and what it told her, "yesterday morning, at least. Probably longer." The large man, Vernon, she'd catch his name later, Vernon Dursley, a name she would remember with significant distaste for years to come, pulled himself up to his full height, which was considerable, and looked at her with an expression that said he was used to solving problems by looming over them. "Now listen here," he said. "That boy is our nephew and what happens in our house is our business," Kara offered. She smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. "I was going to say mistake. But let's not get ahead of ourselves." She looked past him. "I'm going to take him out of that cupboard now. You're welcome to try to stop me." She said it the way someone says the sky is blue or water is wet. A simple statement of fact, entirely absent of threat because threat implied uncertainty about the outcome. Vernon Dursley was not a perceptive man, but something in her tone, or perhaps something in her eyes, or the way she was standing, or some animal instinct that had nothing to do with intelligence and everything to do with survival, made him step back. Kara walked into the house. The cupboard was under the stairs exactly where she'd seen it. The lock was a simple bolt latch, slid across from outside. She slid it back and opened the door. The smell hit her first, the accumulated smell of a space too small, too warm, too long inhabited by someone who hadn't had proper access to bathing facilities. Then the dark, and the pipes, and the boy. He was staring up at her. His eyes, green, she noted, startlingly vivid green even swollen from crying, were wide and wary and still glistening. He'd gone very still the way small animals go still when they're not sure yet whether what's approaching is safe. There was a thin camping mattress on the floor. A blanket that had seen better decades. A small stub of candle. A few broken toy soldiers that someone had probably discarded and he'd salvaged. On the wall, in careful crayon letters that must have taken some time to accomplish in such limited light, someone had written, "Harry's room." Harry's room. Kara crouched down so she was at his level, which meant crouching quite a lot because the space was tiny. She kept her voice gentle and her hands visible and her posture non-threatening, because she'd learned, from experience, from watching Clark, from being the stranger who showed up in crisis, that children in frightening situations needed to be approached like frightened creatures, slowly, calmly, without sudden moves. "Hi," she said. "My name is Kara. What's yours?" The boy stared at her for a long moment. Then, quietly, hoarsely, "Harry. Harry. It's nice to meet you." She looked around the cupboard carefully, letting him see her looking, letting him understand that she understood what she was looking at. "How long have you lived in here?" Harry seemed to think about whether he was supposed to answer. Some internal calculus was happening behind those green eyes, some weighing of risk versus possibility that no 6-year-old should have had enough experience to perform. "Always," he said finally. "Since I was a baby." Something moved in Kara's chest. Something that had a shape like grief and a temperature like anger and a texture she didn't have a word for yet. "Are you hurt?" she asked. "Right now, I mean. Anywhere that hurts?" He touched his ribs, briefly, unconsciously, the way people touch pain they've forgotten to hide. Then seemed to catch himself doing it and lowered his hand. "I'm okay," he said. The same words she'd heard him whispering to himself in the dark. "It's okay. It'll be okay." "You don't have to say that," Kara told him. "Not to me. I promise you don't have to pretend anything to me." He looked at her for a long time. Then his chin wobbled, just once, before he pressed his lips together and steadied himself with a visible effort that broke her heart cleanly in two. "My aunt said if I told anyone she'd send me away," he said. "To a home. She said I'd have nowhere to go." "She was wrong," Kara said. She held out her hand, palm up, fingers open. "You've got somewhere to go. If you want." Harry looked at her hand. He looked at her face. He looked at the open door behind her, and at the hallway beyond, where she could hear the Dursleys hovering, Vernon's breathing, Petunia's sharp quick footsteps. He looked back at her hand. He put his small hand in hers. Kara helped him to his feet. He was unsteady, she noticed, either from the cramped space or from hunger or both, and they walked out of the cupboard together into the hallway. Vernon Dursley was there, and Petunia, and Dudley still holding his biscuit with an expression of blank bewilderment. "You can't just take him," Petunia said, and her voice had gone high and sharp. "He's our ward. You've no legal right. Does he have anything?" Kara asked Harry. "Anything you want to bring?" Harry thought. "There's a photo," he said quietly. A pause, a swallow, in the cupboard. "Of my mum and dad. Aunt Petunia tried to throw it out but I hid it." Kara looked at Petunia with an expression she kept carefully neutral. "Get it for him, please." "You absolutely cannot walk in here and get it for him," Kara said again, with exactly the same inflection, and something in that repetition, the complete absence of escalation, the utter calm of someone who simply didn't require anything from Petunia Dursley's cooperation and was only being polite as a courtesy, made the woman flinch back and then, furiously, go to the cupboard. She emerged with a small photograph, creased and worn from handling. Harry took it from her without looking at his aunt, holding it with both hands, tucking it carefully into his too large shirt. "You'll hear from our solicitor," Vernon Dursley announced, squaring his shoulders. His face had gone from red to a kind of furious puce. "And the authorities. You can't go around taking children." "There are laws." "There are," Kara agreed. She looked at him for a moment. Just looked at him, at his small eyes and his thick neck and his comfortable house and the well-fed sun peering from around the doorframe. "There are also laws about what you've been doing to him. I'd think very carefully about which conversation you want to have with the authorities." She picked Harry up. He went stiff with surprise, clearly not accustomed to being picked up, and then cautious and then, as she stepped out of the front door and the night air hit them, quietly and tentatively settled, one hand gripping her shoulder. "Where are we going?" he asked. "Somewhere safe," she said. "Is that okay?" He nodded, his chin brushing her shoulder. She walked to the end of Privet Drive, turned the corner where the hedge made them invisible from the house, and stopped. "Harry," she said carefully, "I need to tell you something before we go anywhere, because I think you deserve to know what's happening." She turned so she could see his face. "I'm going to fly us. Through the air." "Is that, fly?" Harry repeated. He looked at her with those vivid green eyes. "Like a bird?" "Faster than a bird." She watched his face carefully. "Are you scared of heights?" Harry considered this with the seriousness of a small philosopher. "I don't think so," he said finally. "I've never been high up." "Then hold on," she said, "and don't let go." He tightened his grip on her shoulder. She bent her knees and pushed off and the ground fell away and Harry made a sound, a sharp, involuntary intake of breath, and then went completely silent as the rooftops of Surrey shrank beneath them and the sky opened up around them and the stars appeared overhead in their thousands. "Oh," Harry whispered. Kara smiled. She always smiled the first time someone saw the sky from up here. There was something in the way people looked when the world became small and the sky became everything, something that reminded her why she loved this planet despite everything, why she kept choosing it, why she came back every time. "Good, oh, or bad, oh?" she asked. "Good," Harry said immediately. Then, with a kind of reverence that 5 minutes ago she wouldn't have expected from him, "This is the best thing that's ever happened to me." It was such a pure, uncomplicated statement. Not performed, not exaggerated, not trying to please her. Just the simple truth of a child who had never had very much and was suddenly in the sky. "Okay," she said softly. "Hold on tight. We've got a little way to go." She leveled out at 3,000 feet and turned northwest, toward London, toward the small apartment she shared with her cousin, and behind her Surrey became a patchwork of yellow lights and quiet roads and one very ordinary street that would never feel quite so ordinary again. She'd call Clark from the air. He was going to have opinions. He always had opinions. She'd deal with them. Clark's opinions arrived exactly as expected, in the form of a very tall Kryptonian man opening the door to the apartment, seeing the small dark-haired child in Kara's arms, and saying, "Kara," in the specific three-syllable way that meant "What did you do?" "His name is Harry," Kara said, stepping inside. "He was locked in a cupboard. I'm making tea." "You can't just take a child." "I did just take a child." "Kara, Clark." She turned to look at him. There was a lock on the outside of the door. He closed his mouth. He looked at Harry, who was looking back at him with tired, watchful green eyes from the security of Kara's shoulder. Clark's expression did the thing it always did, that specific sequence Kara had catalogued over years of knowing him, where his initial argument ran directly into his decency and his decency won, and his posture shifted from confrontational to something softer. "Hi there," Clark said, aiming it at Harry. "Hi," Harry said cautiously. "Are you hungry?" Harry nodded, a single tight nod, like he was worried the question was a trick. Clark went to the kitchen without another word. Kara carried Harry to the small couch and sat him down, and he sat very straight and careful, like a child accustomed to being told not to touch things, hands folded in his lap, looking around the apartment with the wide-eyed attention of someone cataloging potential exits. "You can relax," Kara told him. "Nothing in here bites." Harry looked at her. "My aunt's neighbor has a dog," he said. "It bit me once." "Did your aunt do anything about it?" "She told me I probably deserved it." Kara took a breath. "Let it out." "Well," she said. "You didn't. And there's no dog here." Clark came back with a plate of sandwiches, proper ones, cut diagonally, with cheese and meat and a thickness that suggested Clark had immediately understood the situation and responded in the way Kara's cousin always responded to things that made him feel helpless, which was to fix whatever specific element was within his power to fix. He set the plate on the coffee table in front of Harry and sat in the armchair across the room, giving the boy space. Harry looked at the sandwiches. He looked at Clark. He looked at Kara. "Go ahead," Kara said. He picked up a sandwich and took a bite, and then, as if his body had been waiting for permission and now that it had the permission it wasn't going to waste time being polite about it, ate it in about 4 seconds and reached for another with something that wasn't quite desperation but was close enough to make Clark look away briefly. They let him eat. No commentary, no watching him too obviously, just the quiet of the apartment and Harry working through most of the plate with the focused efficiency of genuine hunger. When he slowed down, Clark said, "Harry, my name is Clark. I'm Kara's cousin." Harry looked at him. "She said you'd have opinions." Clark glanced at Kara. "Did she?" "She was on the phone before we landed. I could hear her." He touched his ear, demonstrating. "She said Clark's going to have opinions about this, but he can have them in the morning." "She was right," Clark said. He looked at Kara, who was not looking particularly apologetic. "I do have opinions." "They can still wait until morning," Kara said. Clark nodded slowly. He looked at Harry again, at the cracked glasses and the too big clothes and the careful way the boy held himself, like he was always half-braced for something, and whatever argument he'd been going to make dissolved quietly into the particular kind of silence that means a person has looked at something and understood it completely. "Okay," he said. "One thing first, though." He looked at Harry directly. "You're safe here. Whatever happens next, whatever gets figured out about, well, about everything. Tonight you're safe. All right?" Harry looked at him for a long moment. The wariness in his face was still there. Kara suspected it would be there for a while, that it wasn't something one good night undid, but something in it shifted, fractionally. "Okay," he said. They set Harry up in the spare room, which Clark had primarily been using to store boxes of notes from the planet and which he now cleared in about 4 minutes while Kara found sheets and a pillow and Harry stood in the doorway watching this transformation with an expression she couldn't quite read. "You can put things in here," Kara told him. "Your photo. Whatever you want." He took the photograph from his shirt and looked at it. 2 young people. Kara caught a glimpse, a woman with red hair and his exact green eyes, a man with dark messy hair and glasses that might have been hereditary, and Harry's face did something complicated and private that Kara decided not to look at directly. He set it on the little bedside table that had been under Clark's boxes. Propped it up against the lamp. "Do you know who they are?" he asked, not looking at her. "My parents." "No," Kara said honestly. "But I'd like to, if you want to tell me." "Their names were James and Lily," Harry said. "Aunt Petunia said they died in a car crash. But sometimes," he stopped. "Sometimes?" Kara said gently. "Sometimes when I dream about it, it doesn't feel like a car crash." He was still looking at the photograph. "It feels like something else." "Something," he seemed to reach for a word and not find one. "I don't know. It sounds stupid." "It doesn't sound stupid at all," Kara said. "Dreams like that, they can be important." She thought of Krypton. Of dreams she still had about her mother, her father, the red sun setting over the city. Sometimes the things we can't explain with words are the truest things we know. Harry finally looked at her. "Do you have that? Things like that?" "Every day," she said. He nodded like that settled something. "Kara," he said, as she moved toward the door. She turned. "Why did you come?" he asked. "To that house. You didn't know me. Why did you come?" She thought about it honestly. Not the easy answer, "I heard you," but the real one underneath it. "Because you were crying in the dark thinking no one was coming," she said. "And I couldn't leave that alone." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Thank you." "You're welcome, Harry." She smiled. "Get some sleep." She pulled the door mostly closed and leaned against the hall wall for a moment, listening, an old habit, to the sounds of the apartment settling around her. Clark in the kitchen, making a second cup of tea with the precise motions of someone thinking hard. Harry in the spare room, the careful shift and rustle of someone lying down in an unfamiliar bed. And then, after a few minutes, the slow and even breathing of sleep. Real sleep, not the shallow troubled kind, deep and quiet and safe. She pushed off the wall and went to find Clark. He was standing at the kitchen counter with his tea, and he looked up when she came in with an expression that had entirely abandoned the argument he'd been ready to have earlier. "Clark, I know," he said. "I'm not sending him back." "I know that too." He set his tea down. "I'm going to make some calls in the morning. There are people who can help sort out the legal." "There's something else," Kara said. She sat on the counter, a habit he'd asked her to stop about 100 times and which she continued out of sheer stubbornness. "Something I didn't mention before. When I was in that house, when I was looking at him, I noticed something." Clark frowned. "Noticed what?" "His aunt," Kara said slowly. "Her name is Petunia. She's got a sister, the mother, Lily, the one in the photograph. And Petunia, there was something about the way she looked at him. It wasn't just cruelty. It was fear. She met Clark's eyes. She's afraid of him, Clark. She has been since he arrived on her doorstep. That's where it comes from." Clark was quiet for a moment. "Fear makes people do terrible things." "I know that," Kara said. "That's not the part I'm saying." She paused, choosing her words. "What exactly does a woman who seems utterly ordinary fear in a 6-year-old child?" Clark looked at her. Then he looked at the spare room door down the hall. Then back at her. "You think, I don't know what I think yet," Kara said. "But something about that house wasn't ordinary. Something about him isn't ordinary. I could feel it, Clark, not see it, feel it. Like a current in the air. Like the feeling before lightning." Clark picked up his tea again. Set it back down. "We'll figure it out," he said. "One thing at a time." "One thing at a time," Kara agreed. She hopped off the counter. "You're taking the couch. I want to be close to his room tonight." "That is my bedroom, couch, Clark." "Thank you. Good night." She heard him sigh as she walked away and smiled despite everything. In the morning, Harry woke up before either of them. Kara heard him before she saw him, heard him wake in that sharp, disoriented way of someone who'd forgotten where they were, heard his heartbeat spike and then gradually, slowly come back down as he catalogued his surroundings and remembered. She gave him a few minutes. Let him lie there and look at the ceiling of a room that was his, temporarily but unambiguously his, and let him have the particular luxury of waking up without dread. Then she got up and went to the kitchen and started making breakfast. She heard the quiet sound of his feet on the floor, the creak of the door opening, the pause in the hallway. Then he appeared in the kitchen doorway, hair spectacular in the way only overnight sleep could achieve, glasses slightly askew, wearing his enormous too-big clothes with the unconscious dignity of a person who had no better option. "Good morning," Kara said. "Good morning," he said carefully. Then he looked at the stove, where eggs were happening, and at the table, where orange juice was already poured, and something in his face did the thing it had done last night with the sandwiches, that careful recalibration, that tentative disbelief that became cautious acceptance. "Can I help?" he asked. "Do you know how to help?" "I make my aunt's breakfast," he said. "Every morning. Before school." Kara thought several things. Said none of them. "Sure," she said. "Grab the bread. It's the second cupboard on the left." He found it on the first try, which said something about how well he'd already mapped the kitchen. They made breakfast together, him with the focused attention of a child who'd learned to be useful as a survival strategy, her keeping the atmosphere deliberately light and unhurried. Clark emerged at some point, rumpled from the couch, and stopped in the kitchen doorway at the sight of Harry competently and cheerfully transferring toast to a plate while Kara scrambled eggs, and they discussed, apparently, whether cats or owls were better animals. "Owls," Harry was saying firmly. "Because they can carry things." "Cats don't need to carry things," Kara argued. "They have dignity." "Owls have dignity and usefulness," Harry said with the decisive confidence of someone who has thought about this. "It's not a competition." Clark quietly got a mug from the cabinet, poured himself coffee, and went to sit at the table without interrupting, which was either diplomacy or cowardice, and Kara chose to believe it was diplomacy. They ate breakfast. All three of them, at the same table, the morning light coming through the kitchen window and the sounds of London waking up filtering through from outside. Harry ate 2 pieces of toast and a full plate of eggs, methodical and thorough, and when he was done he sat back and looked at the empty plate and then at Kara with an expression that she'd learn over the following years to recognize as the specifically Harry expression that meant he was about to say something genuine. "I need to ask you something," he said. "Okay," she said. "What happens now?" He looked at her steadily, not afraid exactly, but prepared, that braced quality she'd noticed last night. "I mean, for real. What actually happens? Are you going to take me to some kind of—" "No," she said, before he could finish. "You don't know what I was going to say." "You were going to say home," she said. "Some kind of home. Or school. Or system. Something official." She watched him. He hadn't denied it. "The answer is no. Not if you don't want that." "I don't know exactly what the right answer is yet. Clark's going to make some calls, figure out the practical bits." Clark nodded without looking up from his coffee, "But you're not being shuffled anywhere." "Not today." "Then where am I going?" Harry asked. Kara looked at him. This small, thin, dark-haired boy with the spectacular hair and the cracked glasses and the green eyes that had already seen too much and were looking at her now with this particular combination of wariness and hope, the specific combination that means someone has been disappointed before and hasn't finished deciding whether to be disappointed again. "Here," she said simply. "For now, here." He looked at her. At Clark. Back at her. "Okay," he said. And the brace in his posture, that permanent, almost architectural tension she'd noticed from the first moment in the cupboard, eased, just slightly, just by a few degrees. But those degrees were everything. The practical matters, as Clark had predicted, were complicated and as Clark had not predicted, considerably stranger than anticipated. The calls Clark made that first morning connected him, through a series of escalating referrals that started with a family solicitor and ended somewhere entirely unexpected, with a woman named Arabella Figg, who lived 2 streets from Privet Drive and who seemed, on initial impression, to be a slightly scattered elderly lady who kept too many cats. She was, as it turned out, considerably more than that. She appeared in the doorway of Clark's apartment at 2:30 in the afternoon, having traveled from Surrey with remarkable speed for someone of her apparent age, and spent the first 5 minutes making elaborate fuss over Harry and the following 5 minutes looking between Kara and Clark with an expression that had moved well past surprise into something like desperate calculation. Then she took Kara into the kitchen and closed the door. "You need to understand," she said quietly, "that this child is not, that is, there are parties who have an interest, in a 6-year-old, Kara said. "Yes. Powerful parties. Parties who placed him with those people deliberately, Miss Danvers, and who will have opinions," she said the word with considerable weight, as if she knew something about opinions, about this development. Kara leaned against the counter. "What kind of parties?" Mrs. Figg looked at the closed door and then at Kara and then at the ceiling and then at Kara again. "Are you aware," she said carefully, "of the existence of a certain, well, a certain community? Hidden from people like," she paused delicately. "Like me?" Kara offered. "Like most people," Mrs. Figg said. "A community with its own laws. And methods. And very strong ideas about how certain things should be arranged." Kara was quiet for a moment. "That feeling I had," she said. "At the house. Like a current. Like lightning." Mrs. Figg's eyebrows went up. "You felt that? Can't your kind usually feel it?" "Most people can't. The ones who can are," Mrs. Figg stopped. Looked at her with new eyes. "You're not entirely what you appear to be, are you, dear?" "Neither are you," Kara said. Mrs. Figg made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sigh. "There's a man," she said. "A very old, very clever man. He arranged Harry's placement. He had his reasons, good ones, he always believes his reasons are good, that's rather the trouble with him." She looked at the door again. "He'll come, when he finds out. And he will find out. He has ways." "Let him come," Kara said. "You don't know, I've met old clever men with good reasons before," Kara said. "I'll handle it." Mrs. Figg looked at her for a long moment. Then she nodded, slowly, and something in her expression that had been tense, had been frightened, actually, for all her composure, relaxed. "He'll be difficult," she warned. "He's welcome to be," Kara said. "Is Harry safe? Physically, magically, whatever the right word is?" "Yes," Mrs. Figg said. "He was protected, is protected. There was a charm. Though I should say," she hesitated, "that charm was tied to the house. To his being with his mother's blood. Now that he's not there, I'll protect him," Kara said. "There's no charm needed." Mrs. Figg looked at her steadily. "What are you, exactly, dear?" she asked. "If you don't mind my asking." "I'm someone who doesn't leave children in cupboards," Kara said. "Beyond that, it's complicated." Mrs. Figg laughed, a real one this time, surprised out of her, short and genuine. You'll do, she said. Lord help us, but you'll do. They spent the afternoon at the kitchen table, the three adults and Harry, and what followed was the strangest briefing Kara had ever received, and she had once been briefed by a Martian. Magic was real. Harry Potter was a wizard. His parents had been wizards. His mother had been, still was, in the particular way that sacrifice persists, his protector. A dark wizard of significant power had killed his parents 5 years ago and had then tried to kill Harry, who had been a year old, and the curse had somehow, and here Mrs. Fig became both urgent and somewhat vague, failed. Reflected. Done something unprecedented and returned against the caster. The dark wizard was gone but not gone. That was the current best understanding. And Harry, for this reason, was known, was famous, in that hidden world, as the child who had survived something unsurvivable. Harry listened to all of this with the focused, unblinking attention of a child who had suspected for some time that the world was stranger than he'd been allowed to believe and was now receiving confirmation. When Mrs. Fig finished, he was quiet for a moment. So my parents didn't die in a car crash, he said. No, dear, Mrs. Fig said gently. They didn't. They died fighting something. Yes. Harry looked at the photograph he'd propped up against the kitchen fruit bowl. Kara had moved it there so he could see it from his chair. That's better, he said. That they were fighting. That they didn't just, he stopped. That's better, he said again. Clark looked at Kara across the table. She looked back at him. Neither of them said anything. And I'll be able to do magic? Harry said. You already do, Mrs. Fig said. You've just been doing it without knowing. Strange things that happen around you. Things that you can't explain. Harry thought about it. My hair, he said. Aunt Petunia cuts it and it grows back. She's very angry about that. Yes, Mrs. Fig said, with great control. That would be it. And once when Dudley's gang was chasing me I ended up on top of the school building. He frowned. I thought I jumped very hard. Mrs. Fig said. So Harry looked at his hands, then at Kara. And his eyes went wide suddenly. You flew, he said. Last night. You actually flew. That's real. That's a real thing you did. Yes, Kara said. Are you a witch? No, she said. Something else. But you're not normal, he said it without any judgment at all, just as a statement of fact, and something in the simple directness of it made her smile. Definitely not normal, she agreed. Good, Harry said simply. I don't think I am either. You're really not, Mrs. Fig confirmed. Right. Harry nodded, processing. Then, with characteristic 6-year-old efficiency, filed it under noted and moved on. Is the Dark Wizard going to come back? There are people who think he might, Mrs. Fig said. Eventually. That's why you were placed where, she stopped. Where they'd make me small, Harry said. Not angry. Not even particularly sad. Just precise, in the way he was precise about things, the way children who've had to be observant to survive tend to be precise. Kara said, no one is going to make you small. She said it quietly, the way she'd said things to Vernon Dursley, not as a promise requiring endorsement, not seeking agreement, just as a fact being introduced into the conversation. Harry looked at her. Something in his face, in those green eyes that had seen too much and were now, slowly, beginning to believe they might be allowed to see something better, something shifted. Something moved. The brace eased a few more degrees. Okay, he said. Okay. Outside the window, London hummed and moved and didn't know what had changed in one small apartment in the western part of the city. Mrs. Fig gathered herself to go, promising to be in contact, looking back at Harry from the doorway with the expression of someone who'd been watching from a distance for a long time and was now seeing the future rearrange itself into something unexpected. Clark walked her out. Kara stayed at the kitchen table. Harry had pulled the photograph toward him and was looking at it, tracing the edge of the image with one finger, not the people in it, but the frame. The familiar gesture of someone making something real through touch. "Kara," he said, without looking up. "Yeah. Were you scared?" he asked. "When you came to get me. Were you scared of my uncle? He's very big and loud and usually people," he stopped. "No," Kara said honestly. "I wasn't scared." He looked up. "Why not?" She thought about how to answer that. About Krypton and the sun and physics and 1,000 other things that were too large for a kitchen table. "Because," she said finally, "some people are big and loud because they want you to be afraid of them. And when you're not afraid of them, they don't know what to do." She looked at him steadily. "Your uncle wanted you afraid. The moment I wasn't, he had nothing." Harry turned this over. Nodded, slowly. "I want to be like that," he said. "Not afraid." "Not afraid," he said. "Of him. Of all of them." "You will be," Kara said. She meant it completely, without qualification. It wasn't a comfort or a platitude, it was a prediction, made with the certainty of someone who'd looked at him and seen what was there. "I promise you that." Harry looked at her for a long moment. The evening light was coming through the window, golden and late summer warm, and it caught the green in his eyes and the mess of his dark hair and the photograph on the table between them, his mother's red hair, his father's wild dark hair, that same brow line, that same stubborn set of the jaw. "Thank you," he said again. "You already thanked me," she said. "I know," he said. "But I think it needed saying twice." She laughed, and it was genuine, and Harry looked pleased with himself in the particular way of someone who has just discovered they can make a person laugh and found this an extremely powerful new resource. Clark came back from the door and stood in the kitchen doorway. He looked between the two of them. His expression was the familiar sequence: objection, decency, surrender, but it moved faster than it had last night, and what was left behind after wasn't capitulation but something closer to genuine feeling. "I'm going to make dinner," he said. "Good," Kara said. "You're helping." "Fine." "Harry," Clark said, "can you cook anything other than breakfast?" Harry's face lit up with a careful, cautious, tentative joy that was the saddest and most hopeful thing Kara had ever seen. "I can make soup," he said. "From scratch." "Then you're on soup," Clark said. "Let's go." And just like that, on that first evening, the three of them made dinner together in the small London kitchen while the city went about its business outside, and somewhere across Surrey a lock on a cupboard door hung open and unnecessary in the dark. It wasn't much. It was, in fact, everything. Chapter 2, The House That Fell from the Sky. 2 years passed the way good years do, quickly, and full of things worth remembering. Clark found them a proper house. It took about 3 weeks of legal maneuvering, a call to someone at the Daily Planet who knew someone at the Home Office, and one very pointed conversation between Kara and a social worker who had arrived at the apartment with the specific expression of someone who intended to be difficult and left with the specific expression of someone who had reconsidered their priorities entirely. Harry was placed, officially, in Kara's guardianship, with Clark as secondary. The paperwork said foster care. The reality was something that didn't have a form for it. The house was in Notting Hill, narrow, red brick, 3 floors, with a garden that backed onto a small park and a kitchen large enough for actual cooking and a bedroom for Harry that was, by any reasonable metric, approximately 40 times the size of the cupboard under the stairs at Privet Drive. Kara had let him pick the paint color. He'd chosen a deep, particular shade of blue-green that he said looked like the sky right before dark, and she'd stood in the doorway watching him consider the paint chips with the seriousness of a head of state signing a treaty, and thought, this is what it looks like when someone gets to want something. He wanted things carefully, at first. Tentatively, like each want was a small gamble he wasn't sure would pay out. He wanted books, and he read them ferociously, sitting in corners and up trees in the park, and once memorably balanced along the top of the garden wall until Kara pointed out that this was perhaps not the best use of the wall's structural integrity. He wanted to learn things, everything, with the ravenous appetite of someone who'd been kept from learning and was now making up for lost time. He asked questions constantly and without embarrassment, the questions ranging from why is the sky blue to how do planes stay up to what happens when you die to do you ever get lonely up there. The last aimed at Kara one evening when she'd come back from a late patrol and found him still awake, sitting on the back step looking at the stars. Sometimes, she'd told him honestly. Not as much as I used to. He'd nodded, like that was the right answer, and gone to bed. The magic came in sideways, the way it apparently always had, except now there was no one to punish him for it and so it had less urgency to it. It arrived when it arrived, triggered by emotion or accident or what seemed to Harry's growing understanding to be a completely inscrutable internal logic. The first time it happened in the house, Harry was 8 years old and Clark had said something about Superman being in the news and Harry had said that's you, isn't it, with such complete matter-of-fact certainty that Clark had dropped his coffee mug. The mug had stopped falling 6 inches above the kitchen floor and hung there in mid-air, spinning slowly, while all three of them stared at it. Right, Kara had said finally. That's new. Harry had looked at his outstretched hand and then at the floating mug and then at Kara with an expression that was half triumph and half alarm. The mug had dropped the remaining 6 inches and shattered on the tile. I'll clean it up, Harry had said immediately. You'll do nothing of the sort, Kara had said, and gotten the dustpan herself while Clark sat back down heavily and processed whatever feelings he was having about the confirmation that yes, Clark Kent was Superman, courtesy of an 8-year-old's intuition. How did you know? Clark had asked. You have the same voice, Harry had said, picking a piece of mug up to help despite Kara's instruction. When you're being Superman on the news and when you're talking to Kara about serious things. Most people probably don't notice because they're not really listening. He'd set the piece of mug in the bin and looked up at Clark. I'm really listening. Clark had looked at Kara over Harry's head with an expression that said many things, chief among them, this child is remarkable and also terrifying. Kara had shrugged and kept sweeping. After that, the magic was something they dealt with openly and practically, the way they dealt with Kara's heat vision and Clark's habit of accidentally bending door handles when he was distracted. Harry read everything Mrs. Figg sent him, and she sent quite a lot, carefully curated, with notes in her neat handwriting, and he practiced, tentatively at first, then with increasing confidence, small things that he could feel his way through without formal instruction. Levitation. Small sparks of light. Once, memorably, turning Clark's entire collection of Daily Planet back-issues into origami cranes because Harry had been bored and then immediately panicked when Clark came home. The cranes had taken 3 hours to unorigami and Clark had not been entirely without humor about it, which had told Harry something important about Clark Kent's actual character that no amount of Superman coverage could have conveyed. The bigger magic came with emotions, and the bigger emotions came with bad dreams. Harry had nightmares. Not every night, but regularly enough that Kara had learned the specific sound of them, the shift in his breathing, the sudden spike in his heartbeat, the small helpless sounds that a child makes when the dream has them completely. She never woke him immediately. She'd go to the doorway of his room and stand there and just be present, and usually that was enough. The awareness of her, even through sleep, seemed to reach him, and he'd settle. Once, in the worst one, he hadn't settled. He'd been 9 and the dream had been particularly violent, some remnant memory of green light and terror that Kara was beginning to understand wasn't entirely his imagination, and she'd gone in and sat on the edge of his bed and put her hand on his back and said his name and he'd woken all at once, gasping, and every book on his shelf had flown off simultaneously and hit the opposite wall. He'd looked at the wall. At the books. At her. Sorry, he'd said, hoarse. Don't be, she'd said. Want to tell me what it was? He'd shaken his head. Then, there's a green light, he said. In the dream. And a voice. I can never hear the words properly but I can feel, he touched his scar, that small lightning bolt shape on his forehead. It's here. When the light comes. It hurts here. Kara had looked at the scar. She'd always been able to see something when she looked at it, not with her eyes, exactly, but with that other sense, the one that had led her to Privet Drive in the first place, the one that felt things the way you felt weather coming. Something in the scar that pulsed, very faintly, the way a wound does when it's old but not quite healed. Okay, she'd said carefully. When that happens, when it hurts, tell me. Don't just sit with it. It doesn't hurt during the day, he'd said. Usually. Usually. He'd been quiet for a moment. Sometimes when I'm really concentrating on something. Something magical. It'll pulse once. He'd gestured vaguely. Like something waking up. Kara had filed that away and called Mrs. Figg the next morning. The man arrived on a Thursday. Kara had known he was coming. Not specifically, not a time or a date, but Mrs. Figg had warned her that eventually the old clever man would come, and when the garden gate swung open at 7 in the evening and her ears caught a set of footsteps that were too measured to be ordinary, too deliberate, she'd set down her book and gone to the window. He was tall, white-haired, and wearing robes that he'd made a reasonable attempt to disguise under what appeared to be a very long overcoat, with limited success. He had half-moon spectacles and a long beard and the bearing of someone who was accustomed to rooms organizing themselves around him when he entered them. He paused at the front path and looked at the house with an expression she couldn't read from this distance, and then he walked to the door and knocked. Harry was in the kitchen. Clark was at the Planet. She'd known this conversation was going to happen without Clark and she was fine with that. She opened the door. The man, Dumbledore, she'd known his name for months now, Albus Dumbledore, from Mrs. Figg's careful briefings, looked at her with eyes that were a very pale, very clear blue, and those eyes were sharp in a way that the rest of his expression, which was warm and somewhat avuncular, was clearly designed to obscure. "Miss Danvers," he said. "I wonder if I might come in." "You know my name," she said. "I've made it my business to know," he said pleasantly. "Rather as you've made it your business to know mine, I suspect." She stepped back from the door. He came in, ducking slightly under the frame despite the fact that the door was a perfectly standard height, and stood in the hallway and looked around with a calm, unhurried attention that was taking everything in despite appearing to be doing nothing in particular. "Tea," Kara said. "That would be lovely," Dumbledore said. She led him to the sitting room and went to the kitchen, where Harry was at the table doing something with a textbook and several pieces of paper and looked up when she came in. "There's someone here I need to talk to," she said quietly. "Stay in here for a bit. I'll come get you when it's time." Harry looked at the door. "Is it about me?" he asked. "Yes." He nodded, accepting this, and looked back at his textbook. She'd never had to explain to Harry that she'd protect him. He simply knew it, the way he knew things, by listening, by watching, by the particular attention he paid to the world around him. His confidence in her wasn't the blind faith of dependency. It was something she'd earned, slowly, over 2 years of small and large demonstrations. She was glad of it. She made tea and carried it to the sitting room and sat across from Dumbledore. He was looking at a framed photograph on the sideboard, Harry at the Natural History Museum, standing in front of the dinosaur skeleton, grinning upward with what Kara privately considered his best grin, the one that was all unguarded joy. "He looks well," Dumbledore said. "He is well," Kara said. "He wasn't when I found him." Dumbledore looked at her. "No," he said, and whatever she'd expected from him in this moment, deflection, justification, authority, his voice had something genuine in it, something that sounded like actual pain. "No, I don't imagine he was." She watched him for a moment, recalibrating. She'd come into this conversation ready for a fight and she was still ready for one, but she was also, because she was Kara Zor-El and she paid attention to people, noticing that this man carried something that wasn't comfortable with him. "You knew," she said. "Not an accusation. A fact." "I knew his aunt was not warm toward him," Dumbledore said carefully. "I had watchers, Mrs. Figg. Among others. They reported that conditions were—" He stopped, and something crossed his face briefly. "I made a calculation," he said. "One that I have," he paused again, seeming to actually weigh his words, which she noted as unusual for someone clearly so practiced at using them. I have reconsidered, since. The calculation being that keeping him small and frightened was safer for him, Kara said. The calculation being that Voldemort, she noticed that he said the name without flinching, where Mrs. Fig still whispered it with instinctive dread, had allies, and resources, and that a child who was famous, who was known to be powerful, who was being raised to know his own strength, he stopped. Would be a target, Kara said. Would be a target, yes. He was a target anyway, Kara said. He was locked in a cupboard and he was still a target. The difference is that one version of that involved him knowing his own worth and one version didn't. She looked at Dumbledore steadily. You chose the version where he didn't know his own worth. I think you called it humility. I think it was something else. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. What do you think it was? He asked. And the question was genuinely curious, which surprised her. Control, she said. Not malicious. I don't think you're malicious. But you wanted a weapon that would go where you aimed it, and a child who doesn't know what he's worth is much easier to aim than one who does. The silence that followed was long and very specifically the silence of someone confronting something they already knew and had been hoping no one would say out loud. I have given my life to protecting people, Dumbledore said finally. I know that, Kara said. I believe it. It doesn't make you right about this. No, he said. Perhaps not. He picked up his tea, drank from it, set it down. He has been with you 2 years. How is he? Truly. Truly. Kara thought about Harry in the kitchen right now, reading his textbook with his feet tucked under him, his hair still spectacular, his glasses currently the third pair because he kept sitting on them. Harry making soup from scratch on Sunday evenings because he'd decided it was his contribution and he made it very seriously. Harry in the garden last August, discovering he could make light, actual warm golden light, with his hands, and standing there in the dusk making it bigger and smaller with the expression of someone who has just discovered an instrument they were born to play. Harry asking her once, at 10 years old, when will I be able to go to school? A real one, I mean. The kind in the letters. He's going to be extraordinary, she said. Dumbledore looked at her. He always was, he said. No, she said. Before, he was going to be extraordinary despite everything done to him. Now he's going to be extraordinary because of who he actually is. That's different. That matters. Dumbledore studied her with those sharp, pale eyes. You care for him considerably, he said. He's mine, Kara said. It came out simply and without drama and she meant it completely. Not in a legal sense, not in a blood sense. In the sense that actually matters. Dumbledore nodded slowly. Then I will say this, he said. He will be called to Hogwarts when he is 11. I cannot change that, it is his birthright, his inheritance, it is where he belongs in the world he comes from. I would ask, and he paused, and she heard in the pause the unfamiliar texture of someone making a request rather than a pronouncement, I would ask that you allow him to go. When the time comes. That you don't, keep him? Kara said. No. I'd never keep him from anything. She looked at him. But he goes as himself. Not as whatever role you've been writing for him since he was a year old. He goes as Harry. Whatever he's going to do there, he does it his way. His way may be somewhat unorthodox, Dumbledore said, and she caught what might have been very dry humor in his voice. Good, Kara said. He was quiet for another moment. Then he looked toward the kitchen door, and his expression was that complex, painful, private thing again. May I speak with him? Kara stood. Harry, she called, without raising her voice much, she knew he could hear her through the door. The kitchen door opened and Harry came out and stood in the sitting room doorway, looking at the old man with the cool, assessing attention he gave everything he hadn't decided about yet. Dumbledore looked at him. And something in the old man's face, all that careful composure, all that practiced warmth, did something unguarded. Just for a moment. "Harry," he said. "My name is Albus Dumbledore. I suspect you've heard of me." "Yes," Harry said. "I imagine Arabella had some things to say about me." "She had many things to say about you," Harry said. "Some of them were quite generous." Dumbledore almost smiled. "I should like to speak with you, if you're willing." Harry looked at Kara. She nodded slightly. He looked back at Dumbledore with those green eyes that had learned, over 2 years, to be open and observant rather than braced and wary. "All right," he said. He came and sat in the armchair Kara had vacated. She moved to the doorway, giving them space but staying close, and Harry was clearly aware she was there and clearly comfortable with it. "You know about your parents," Dumbledore said. "Yes," Harry said. "I know about Voldemort too." He said the name without flinching and Dumbledore's eyebrows rose slightly. "Mrs. Figg said people were scared to say it. I decided I wasn't going to be." He said it matter-of-factly. "It's just a name." "Just so," Dumbledore said. Something in his voice had shifted, still warm, still careful, but with a new quality, like someone adjusting their lens because what they'd expected to see and what was actually there required different focal lengths. "You are very like your father." "And my mother," Harry said. "Mrs. Figg says I have her way of working things out." "She's correct." Dumbledore looked at him steadily. "You will come to Hogwarts in 3 years. I hope, I believe, you will find it a home." He paused. "It will not all be easy. There are people who have expectations of you. Some of those people mean well. Some of them will try to use those expectations to make me into what they need," Harry said. Dumbledore stopped. "Kara explained it," Harry said. "Not in those words exactly. But I understand. People decided what I was before I was old enough to decide it myself, and now some of them are going to be difficult when I'm not that." He looked at Dumbledore with an expression that was not aggressive, not combative, just clear, the way clear water is clear, cleanly and all the way through. "I'm not angry about it. I just thought you should know I know." Dumbledore sat back. He looked at Kara in the doorway. He looked back at Harry. And when he spoke again, his voice had lost the last of its careful management and become something more honest. "I owe you an apology," he said. "For the years at Privet Drive. For what I chose that I should not have chosen." Harry looked at him for a long moment. "Okay," he said. "Not it's fine or don't worry about it. Just okay. Acknowledged, registered, filed. Not forgotten but not weaponized either." Dumbledore nodded. He stood, and he seemed older suddenly, standing, more tired, the robes less magnificent and the eyes less sharp. He put his tea down. 3 years, he said to Kara. "I hope we can," he paused. "I hope we can be, if not allies exactly, then people with compatible interests." "We want the same thing for him," Kara said. "We'll figure out the rest." He nodded. He let himself out, she heard the gate swing behind him, and he was gone. Harry was still in the armchair, looking at the space where Dumbledore had been. "Well?" Kara said. "He's not bad," Harry said, with the particular Harry verdict of someone who assessed people rigorously and said what he meant. "He's used to being right. That makes him dangerous. But he's not bad." "No," Kara agreed. "He's not bad. Will he be difficult?" "Probably," she said. "But we'll handle it." Harry nodded. "Okay," he said, and went back to his textbook. The 3 years passed. What Kara would remember most, looking back, was not the dramatic moments, and there were some, Harry's magic growing more assured and more powerful and occasionally more startling, but the texture of ordinary days. Harry learning to cook more things and developing strong opinions about whether garlic was being used correctly in various dishes. Harry and Clark watching football together on Sunday afternoons with the intensity of a religious observance. Harry discovering that he could communicate with snakes when one appeared in the garden and having a 20-minute conversation with it about the general quality of the garden's earthworm population before realizing this was unusual. I assumed everyone could, he'd said, slightly embarrassed. Not everyone, Clark had said carefully. Is it? Harry had frowned. Is it bad? It's rare, Kara had said. It doesn't make it bad. It makes it rare. Harry had looked at the snake, which had looked back at him with the expression snakes have that humans project emotions onto. It says the worms on the east side of the garden are better quality, Harry had reported. It's quite opinionated about it. Of course it is, Clark had said. Kara had laughed until she couldn't breathe. She trained him. Not formally, not the way Clark had trained her, with missions and protocols and a careful architecture of superheroics, but practically, intuitively, in the way she'd learned worked best with Harry, which was by doing things together and letting him figure out what he figured out and talking through the rest. She took him flying. Not every day, but often enough that he stopped being surprised by it and started being simply at home in it, the sky something he inhabited rather than visited. The first time she'd taken him at serious speed, not the gentle 3,000-foot float of that first night but actual speed, the kind that made the world go white at the edges, he'd shouted something wordless into the wind and then laughed, and the laugh had been the best sound she'd heard in a long time. Again, he'd said, when she slowed. Again. She'd looked at him. You're not scared. Of course not, he'd said, with the particular confidence of an 11-year-old who had lived in the orbit of the two most powerful beings on the planet and absorbed their casual relationship with the extraordinary. Faster this time. She'd gone faster this time. She wasn't sure exactly when she started looking at him differently. That was the honest part, the part she turned over and examined when she was by herself, at altitude, at 3 in the morning when the world was quiet and she was allowed to think things through without an audience. He was her ward, her family, her responsibility, those categories were clear and good and true. And then, gradually, incrementally, they became complicated by something else. She was 16 years older than him. She understood that. She filed it carefully away, correctly, in the category of things to not act on until the calculus changed. She wasn't the kind of person who confused feelings with actions. She'd grown up on a planet where emotional complexity was addressed with science and philosophy and considerable precision, and she applied that same precision to this. What she felt, she could feel. What she did about what she felt was a different matter, governed by different rules, and the rules were clear. He was 11 when the Hogwarts letter arrived. She was there when he opened it, sitting at the kitchen table with his cereal, envelope in hand, reading the letter inside with the focused attention he gave everything that mattered to him. She watched his face do its sequence, the careful reading, the slow nod, the specific quality of processing that meant the thing had landed in the right place. He set the letter down. He looked at her. It's real, he said. Of course it's real, she said. I mean, he touched the letter. I've known it was real. Mrs. Figg, the books, he gestured vaguely at the accumulated evidence of the last 5 years. But now it's real. He stopped. Scary, she offered. He considered this with the honesty she'd always loved about him. Exciting, he decided. Mostly exciting. A bit scary. Mostly exciting. Good ratio, she said. He picked up his cereal. Put it down. Picked up the letter again. Read it again, though she was certain he had it memorized already. You'll visit, he said. It wasn't quite a question. As often as I can without making Dumbledore's eye twitch, she said. Harry smiled. That's a low bar. I think you make his eye twitch by existing. I'm very good at existing, Kara agreed. He laughed, and the laugh was the same laugh from 300 miles per hour in the upper atmosphere, full and unguarded and purely himself, and she thought, whatever happens at Hogwarts, whatever comes, they won't be able to take this from him. This is his now and it's permanent. I need new glasses, he said suddenly, practically. Yes, you do. And robes, the letter says. He was already reading the supply list. And a wand. He looked up with green eyes that were bright and alive. I get to have a wand. You get to have a wand, she confirmed. I already know how to do things without one, he said, in the slightly competitive tone of someone who'd spent 5 years figuring things out the hard way and wasn't entirely sure how he felt about official implements. Think of it as an amplifier, Kara said. Like the difference between speaking and using a microphone. You've been speaking. Now you get the microphone. Harry thought about this. I don't know if the world is ready for that, he said. Probably not, she said cheerfully. Let's find out. The shopping trip to Diagon Alley was, by any reasonable measure, the day everything became undeniable. Kara had been to Diagon Alley before, twice, with Mrs. Figg, learning the landscape, because she'd decided years ago that she would know Harry's world before he entered it rather than learning alongside him when it would have been less useful. She'd been to Gringotts, walked the cobblestones, looked in the shop windows. She'd been a tourist in the magical world, mostly unremarkable, her powers creating a kind of low-grade atmospheric confusion she'd learned to tamp down. With Harry, it was different. They went in through the leaky cauldron, Kara having gotten the address from Mrs. Figg, and the moment they were through the brick wall and the alley opened up around them, Harry stopped walking entirely. He stood there and looked at it, the crooked buildings leaning toward each other overhead, the owls in cages outside Elops, the wand waving outside quality Quidditch supplies, the people in robes moving through the space with the casual ease of those at home in something extraordinary, and his face was completely unguarded. Just wonder, clean and uncontained, the face of someone whose world has just expanded. Right, he said quietly. Right, Kara agreed. He turned to look at her, grinning, and she grinned back, and for a moment they were just two people at the entrance to something new and good, and then someone in the street recognized him. It started as a murmur. Then another. Then the word Potter passing from mouth to mouth through the crowded alley with the audible speed of a lit fuse, and people turning to look, and Harry's face shifting from wonder to wariness as the attention arrived like weather. An older man approached, teary-eyed, grabbing Harry's hand and shaking it. Then a woman with a baby who said she'd never forgotten, never, and Harry standing there in the middle of it with the specific blankness of someone processing something they hadn't been prepared for. Kara moved. She stepped up beside him, close, not between him and the people but beside him, her presence shifting the dynamic in ways she was practiced at without making a scene of it, and said, calmly and pleasantly, "We appreciate it. He needs a bit of space," in a tone that got the message across without creating a confrontation. The people stepped back. Not because they were frightened of her, but because there was something in the way she stood next to him, something that said this person belongs to someone, in the specific sense that means someone is looking out for them. Harry looked at her gratefully. Still mostly exciting, she murmured. The ratio is shifting, he muttered back. She laughed quietly. Come on. Wand first. Ollivander's was dim and smelled of wood and something older, and the man behind the counter, narrow, pale, with silver eyes that seemed to have been given more light than the rest of him, looked at Harry and then, interestingly, at Kara, with the specific expression of someone whose instrument was picking up unusual readings. Mr. Potter, he said. I've been expecting you. He looked at Kara again. And, forgive me. You are not from here. I'm with him, Kara said. Yes, Ollivander said, as if that explained rather than evaded. Yes, I see that. He turned back to Harry. Now. Let us find your wand. 45 minutes later, after a frankly extraordinary number of wands and an incident involving a shelf of display boxes taking to the air simultaneously, Harry was holding a wand of holly and phoenix feather, 11 inches, and looking at it with the same expression he'd had about the paint chip and the Hogwarts letter and the photograph on the bedside table, the expression that meant something had arrived that was genuinely his. Ollivander watched him with those silver eyes. Curious, he said softly. Very curious. You said that about the wand, Harry said. I'm saying it about you, Ollivander said. The wand that chose you, its brother, you should know, gave you that scar. His eyes went to Harry's forehead. It is unusual that two such wands should have met. That you should be standing here at all. Harry touched his scar with one finger, automatically. I've been told, he said. It doesn't bother me. Ollivander looked at him for a long moment. Then at Kara. Then back at Harry. No, he said. I don't imagine it does. Not anymore. Something in his expression, something that had been assessment, settled into something else. You'll do extraordinary things, Mr. Potter. Both terrible and great. Looking forward to both, Harry said. Kara pressed her lips together to keep from laughing and failed. Ollivander looked mildly startled. Harry looked pleased. They left with the wand wrapped in tissue paper and Harry walking beside her back through the alley with it tucked under his arm the way someone carries something they've spent years waiting for without knowing it. He was quiet for a while, navigating the crowd, until they'd gotten to a quieter end of the alley and could walk without people staring. Then he said, Kara. Yeah. Thank you. He looked at her sideways, not dramatically, just the regular way. For all of it. Not just today. All of it. Harry, you don't have to, I know I don't have to, he said. I want to. He paused, considering. I know I wasn't, I know when you found me I wasn't much. I know I was, stop, she said. He stopped walking. She stopped with him. You were exactly enough, she said. You were always exactly enough. You were 6 and alone and you were still telling yourself it was okay in the dark. She met his eyes. That's not much. That's everything. He looked at her for a moment. 11 years old, wand under his arm, in a world that had been waiting for him for 10 years, green eyes entirely steady. I know, he said. And the thing was, he did know. Not with the brittle, performance quality knowing of someone who needed reassurance. With the genuine, settled knowing of someone who'd been told a true thing enough times that it had become their own. I just wanted to say thank you anyway. You're welcome, she said. Anyway. They bought the rest of the supplies, and robes at Madame Malkin's, where another red-haired boy with freckles and large hands gave Harry a cheerful nod, and Harry made his opinion about the required reading list loudly known to no one in particular while examining the textbooks at Flourish and Blots. Why does anyone need a book called 1000 Magical Herbs and Fungi, he announced. Herbology, Kara said. I don't want to know about fungi. You might need fungi. I refuse to need fungi. The woman browsing next to them in the aisle looked at Harry with the expression of someone who had never heard anyone argue with fungi and found it bracing. You'll take the fungi book, Kara said pleasantly, and you'll probably end up finding it interesting and refusing to admit it. Harry looked at her. You sound very sure. I know you, she said. You find everything interesting. It's one of your best qualities and your most inconvenient. He made an unconvinced noise and took the fungi book. He'd tell her, in February of the following year, that herbology was one of his better subjects. He would not specifically acknowledge the fungi. They came back through the leaky cauldron at dusk, Harry carrying bags of books and robes and equipment, and emerged on the Muggle side onto a London side street with the noise and ordinariness of the city closing around them. Harry stood for a moment adjusting, the way she'd noticed he always did when moving between worlds, a breath, a recalibration, the same attention he gave everything. Ready, she said. He looked at her. In the late light of the London evening, with his arms full of the beginning of his wizard life, in his too small already jacket and his new glasses and his hair that would never do anything anyone asked of it. Yes, he said. He sounded like someone who meant it with their whole self. Not bravado, not performance. Just the absolute settled certainty of someone who knows what they're walking toward and isn't afraid of it. Kara had the thought, clear, true, and not for the first time, that there was something happening between knowing him and feeling things she needed to keep categorized properly. She had it, acknowledged it, filed it in its careful place. She said, "Let's go home." And they went home, and Clark made dinner, and Harry told him about the wand and the alley and the wand brother connection and the fungi book, and Clark laughed at the right places, and the evening was warm and ordinary in the way that only matters if you've known the alternative. Later, after Harry was in bed, Kara stood in the garden in the dark and listened to London. All of it, the full unfiltered roar of 9 million lives happening simultaneously, all their joy and grief and ordinary Wednesday evenings, all their doors closing and televisions and children sleeping and people loving people. She stood in the middle of all of it and thought about an 11-year-old boy with a holly wand and a destiny the size of a world, and thought about being the person who got to stand next to him while he walked into it. It was not uncomplicated. It was, she thought, exactly right. Chapter 3, Hogwarts has never seen this before. The Hogwarts Express left from platform 9 3/4 at 11 o'clock on the 1st of September, and Harry arrived at King's Cross at 10:15 with Kara, Clark, and an owl he'd named Ptolemy, after the astronomer, because he'd been reading about ancient astronomers that summer and felt strongly that an owl deserved a name with weight to it. Ptolemy was a tawny owl with opinions. He'd expressed several of them during the taxi ride and was now expressing one about his cage with the focused displeasure of someone who had not approved this arrangement. "He'll be fine once the train moves," Kara said, of the owl. "That's what you said in the taxi," Harry pointed out. "I was optimistic in the taxi." They found the barrier between platforms 9 and 10 without difficulty. Harry had read about it in Hogwarts, a history, which he'd added to his reading list on his own initiative in July, and had spent 30 seconds confirming the location before walking through the wall with the specific casualness of someone who has decided that if you're going to walk through a wall, you walk through it decisively or not at all. Kara followed. Clark came behind her, stooping slightly on the other side for no structural reason whatsoever, just the reflex of someone accustomed to ceilings that didn't exist. The Scarlet engine was magnificent. Harry stopped and looked at it the way he'd looked at Diagon Alley, that clean, complete wonder, and then straightened and started moving before the wonder could become hesitation, trolley in front of him, Ptolemy rocking in his cage. The platform was chaos. Families, trunks, owls, cats, a frog someone had clearly lost and was pursuing with increasing desperation. Steam and noise and the specific emotional weather of a place where some people were excited and some were nervous and some were being held onto by parents who weren't going to let go until the train physically moved. Kara noticed, watching the crowd, the number of people who looked at Harry. Not the overwhelming recognition of Diagon Alley, here people were distracted by their own departures, but the quiet double takes, the murmured exchanges between parents, the way attention slid toward him and then quickly away, like people who'd been raised to believe seeing him was significant and didn't know what to do with the fact that he just looked like a boy with a trolley. She noticed Harry noticing them noticing. He didn't flinch from it or lean into it. He just saw it, registered it, moved on. She was proud of that in the specific way she was always proud of his instincts. "Compartment," he said, already thinking practically, scanning the train. "I want to be away from the engine. Less noise." "Ears like your mother's," Clark said, then seemed to catch himself. Harry looked at him with interest rather than hurt. "You knew her?" "No," Clark said. "But I've read things. Heard things. People who knew her said she was particular about sound too. About noticing things." He looked at Harry with the expression he sometimes had when he was trying to say something real without making it heavy. She was apparently very good at working out what was happening in a room before anyone told her. "I can definitely do that," Harry said. "I know," Clark said. There was a moment between them that was complete without being sentimental, the way Harry and Clark's moments often were, efficient and genuine and not requiring any more air time than they needed. Then Clark picked up the trunk with one hand and swung it onto the train with the controlled ease of someone who had to remember that ordinary was a performance, and Harry climbed up and they heaved the trunk along to a compartment near the rear of the train, and Ptolemy was installed in the overhead rack, and then they were on the platform again and the train was loading and the minutes were counting down. Clark shook Harry's hand, then pulled him into a brief, proper hug, which Harry returned with both arms, entirely without self-consciousness. "Be excellent," Clark said. "Obviously," Harry said. Clark stepped back and Kara was there, and Harry looked at her and his face was, not the brace, not anymore, never the brace, but something that was simply open and real and entirely trusting. "Any last instructions?" he said. "Don't let anyone make you small," she said. "Don't hide what you can do. Write to me every week." She paused. "And feed Ptolemy regularly or he'll sulk." "He's already sulking." "Then this is your baseline to work from." He laughed. She hugged him, and he was nearly as tall as her now at 11, was going to be tall, you could already tell, and he hugged her back with the ease of someone who'd had 5 years of learning that physical closeness was safe, was good, was allowed. "Kara," he said, against her shoulder. "Yeah. I'll be all right." "I know you will," she said. "I'm not worried about you." "I know you're not. I just wanted to say it." He pulled back and looked at her with those green eyes that always said the exact thing he meant. "So you could hear it." She pressed her hand to the side of his face, once, briefly. He leaned into it for just a second. Then the whistle blew and he was gone, up the steps, down the corridor, his dark head visible through the window as he settled into his compartment, and the train began to move and he turned to look out the window and raised one hand, and Kara raised hers, and the Hogwarts Express took Harry James Potter away into his world. Clark stood beside her. "He's going to be all right," he said. "I told him that. I'm saying it for you." She watched the last carriage disappear around the bend in the track and stood there for a moment in the steam and noise of the emptying platform. "I know," she said. "I know he is." She turned away. "Come on. I've got a patrol." The letters started arriving on September 3rd, which was faster than she'd expected and exactly on schedule with what she knew about Harry. "The Sorting Hat argued with me," the first letter said, in Harry's clear, slightly slanted handwriting. "I asked not to be in Slytherin and it said I was being short-sighted. I said it wasn't its decision and it went quiet for about 10 seconds, which I think was the magical equivalent of being put on hold, and then it said Gryffindor." Everyone seemed relieved. "I'm not sure I understand Hogwarts politics yet, but I understand there are some. Room is comfortable. There's a girl named Hermione in my year who reads faster than I do. I found this offensive and then realized she'd been raised reading and I'd only been doing it for 5 years and recalibrated. She's brilliant. I think we'll get along. The food is extraordinary. I had 4 kinds of dessert. Please tell Clark I finally understand why he talks about pie the way he does. It's everything." Kara read it twice. Then she went to find Clark. "He made a friend," she said. Clark looked up from his laptop. "What kind?" "The brilliant kind." She folded the letter. "He's going to be fine." I said, "Yes, yes." She waved a hand. "You were right." Clark looked insufferably pleased and had the wisdom not to say anything further. The letters continued weekly, as requested, sometimes longer, sometimes just a paragraph, always with the particular Harry quality of having been thought about properly before being written. He described his classes with the attentive interest he brought to everything, identifying what he liked immediately: defense against the dark arts, transfiguration, charms, the wand is an amplifier, you were completely right, and I refuse to say I told you so, but, and what he found less immediately compelling, potions is run by a man named Professor Snape who has decided he doesn't like me before I've done anything. I've been trying to work out what that's about. I think it's about my father. I'm not going to give him the reaction he seems to be expecting, and the odd discovery, I appear to be naturally gifted at flying a broomstick. The flying teacher looked at me doing maneuvers I hadn't been taught yet and had the expression of someone whose job just got more complicated. The Quidditch discovery had made Kara smile for a full afternoon. Of course Harry could fly. She visited at Halloween. She hadn't planned to, Hogwarts was Harry's world and she'd meant to give him space to inhabit it fully before inserting herself, but something had been nagging at her for 2 weeks that she couldn't identify, some low-grade frequency she'd been picking up the way she'd picked up Harry crying in the dark over Surrey. Not an alarm, exactly. An awareness. She flew in the night before, not in costume, just Kara, arriving at Hogsmeade and making her way to the castle with the somewhat bemused cooperation of the groundskeeper, a giant of a man named Hagrid who'd apparently heard of Kara in the context of Harry's guardianship and greeted her with the uncomplicated warmth of someone who loved Harry and therefore extended considerable goodwill to anyone Harry loved. "He's doing brilliant," Hagrid told her over tea the size of a small bucket. "Honestly, best defense student Professor Quirrell's had in years, though," he stopped. "Though?" Kara said. Hagrid looked uncomfortable. "I dunno," he said, in the way that meant he did know. "Quirrell's a bit," he seemed to be choosing his word. "Jumpy." "Jumpy," Kara repeated. "Like something's both airin' him." Hagrid shrugged with the specific stoicism of someone who had learned to mind his business. "Probably just nerves. He went off and had an adventure last year, came back a bit different, people deal with things in different ways." "What kind of adventure?" Kara said. "Went to study dark arts firsthand," Hagrid said, looking progressively less comfortable. "Albania, I think. Or somewhere near." Kara filed that away with the careful thoroughness she'd inherited from years of processing information faster than the situation required. Albania. Dark arts. A defense professor who'd come back jumpy. And Harry's scar, which Harry had mentioned in a letter 2 weeks ago, pulsed once in potions when Snape asked me a question. Didn't hurt. Just, there. She went to find Harry the next morning, in the stone corridor outside Transfiguration, and his face when he saw her was uncomplicated delight. "You came," he said, and it wasn't accusing or surprised, just, pleased. Openly and straightforwardly pleased. "I was in the neighborhood," she said. "You were not in the neighborhood. We're in Scotland. I'm fast." He laughed and hugged her briefly, and then they walked together through the castle while it was still early and the corridors were quiet, and Harry showed her the things he'd clearly been composing a tour of in his head, the moving staircases, which he navigated with the ease of someone who'd figured them out early, the portrait of the very opinionated knight on the 5th floor, the Ollery, where Ptolemy received Kara with moderate interest and significantly more enthusiasm than he showed. "For most things. He likes you better than me," Harry observed. "Everyone likes me better than you," Kara said. "It's a cross you bear." "Tragic," Harry agreed. Hermione found them at breakfast. She was exactly as advertised, quick, precise, with an expression of constant assessment that Kara recognized as the look of someone whose mind never quite stops working on whatever it's currently working on. She looked at Kara with the specific attention she seemed to give everyone and everything and said, "You're Kara Danvers. Harry's told me about you." "Good things, I hope," Kara said. "He said you're the reason he turned out all right," Hermione said, with the slightly clinical directness of someone who filtered information without social softening. Then she seemed to hear how that had sounded and added, "That was meant as a compliment." "I know it was," Kara said. "It's nice to meet you, Hermione." "Likewise." Hermione sat down and reached for toast with one hand and a book with the other. "He also said you can fly without a broomstick." "I can." "How fast?" "Fast. Roughly, very fast," Kara said. "The exact number gives people ideas." Hermione looked delighted by this in a way she tried to contain and didn't quite manage. Harry, beside her, was eating eggs with the comfortable ease of someone who'd found his place at the table and intended to keep it. It was the Halloween feast that evening that made the urgency make sense. Kara was in Hagrid's hut when she heard it, the specific quality of running in stone corridors, and panic in the footsteps, and then a voice she already recognized as Professor Quirrell bursting into the great hall above with the words "troll," in the dungeon, and then something that was either a feint or a dramatic exit, she couldn't tell from this distance. She was already moving. She found the troll before the teachers did. It was in the girls' bathroom on the 3rd floor, 12 feet of mountain troll, gray and reeking, with a club the size of a tree and absolutely no awareness of the figure who dropped through the skylight above it and landed between it and the row of sinks. The girl behind the sinks was Hermione. She was pressed against the wall with her hands over her mouth and she looked at Kara with enormous, terrified eyes that were taking in the impossible reality of a woman having fallen from the ceiling and was apparently intended to do something about the troll. Kara did something about the troll. She grabbed the club on the upswing, stopped it with one hand, the troll lurching forward with the unexpected halt of its momentum, and looked up at the creature with the calm assessment she brought to threats that weren't actually threatening to her. "Down," she said, to Hermione. "Floor, under the sinks." Hermione went to the floor. "Smart girl." Kara hit the troll with the club it had been holding, using its own weapon with rather less than her full strength, because she'd learned that the aftermath of going full strength in enclosed spaces was considerable, and the troll sat down abruptly and then lay down, stunned, filling most of the available floor space. Harry came through the door 30 seconds later with Ron Weasley. She'd clocked Ron from the breakfast encounter, red hair, freckles, good heart immediately evident, the kind of person whose intentions announced themselves before his words did, and both of them stopped dead at the sight of the fallen troll. Harry looked at the troll. At Kara standing next to it. At Hermione emerging from under the sinks. "I was going to do something about that," he said. "You were 30 seconds away," Kara said. "I had a plan." "I'm sure you did. It was a good plan." "Harry," she said, with considerable affection, "the troll is dealt with. We can discuss your plan later." Ron looked between all of them with the expression of someone whose Halloween had taken a significantly unexpected turn and who was doing his best to adjust. "Is that," he said, looking at Kara. "Are you?" "She's my guardian," Harry said. "Kara, this is Ron." "Ron, Kara." "Brilliant," Ron said, to no one in particular, looking at the troll. The teachers arrived approximately 45 seconds after that, McGonagall, Snape, and Quirrell, and stopped in the doorway at the tableau of one unconscious troll, one strange woman, and 3 11-year-olds. McGonagall's expression moved through several distinct phases. Snape looked at Harry with a dark, unreadable assessment. Quirrell looked at Kara. The look lasted only a moment. Then he looked away. But Kara caught it, and she filed it with everything else she'd been filing, and the picture it contributed to was becoming very clear. "Miss Danvers," McGonagall said, with the specific tone of someone extremely practiced at composure deploying it at full capacity. "Professor," Kara said pleasantly. "You are aware that Hogwarts grounds are, I was invited," Kara said. "By Professor Dumbledore's standing arrangement." This was technically true. Dumbledore had said, in their conversation, that he hoped they could work toward compatible interests. She'd decided that translated to visiting access. "I was in Hagrid's when I heard the commotion." McGonagall looked at the troll. At the state of the bathroom ceiling where Kara had come through the skylight. Back at Kara. "I see," she said, in a tone that contained several paragraphs she had decided not to speak aloud. Quirrell said nothing. He was very carefully not looking at Kara, in the specific way that meant he was extremely aware of her. Later, after Hermione and Ron and Harry had been sent to Gryffindor Tower and the teachers had dispersed and Kara was making her way back through the castle to Hagrid's, she stopped in a corridor and stood still and listened. A heartbeat. Irregular, layered, 2 rhythms instead of 1, occupying the same chest. She'd heard something like that before, in a very different context, when Clark had been briefly inhabited by something during a mission she tried not to think about. 2 minds, 2 pulses, 1 body. She followed it back to Quirrell's office and stood outside the closed door and listened properly. The voice she heard underneath Quirrell's was not Quirrell's. It was thinner, more resonant, older in a way that had nothing to do with age and everything to do with something that had survived past its natural end. It was speaking in a low murmur too quiet for human hearing, but Kara had never been limited by human hearing. "The girl is a problem. She is not magical. She is something else. She cannot be controlled by the usual, she is a child's guardian, Quirrell whispered back. She is only here for, she heard me. In the bathroom. She did not show it but she heard something, felt something. She will not be easy to move around. Then we avoid her. We avoid no one, the thin voice said. We account for variables. A being of her type is a variable I did not anticipate. Find out more about her. Quietly. Kara stood in the corridor for a long moment. So Voldemort was in the castle. Not just adjacent to it, not some distant threat, in the castle, wearing a professor. And he was already adjusting his plans to account for her. She thought about going to Dumbledore immediately. She thought about it carefully, the way she thought about strategic decisions, what it gained, what it cost, what it changed. Then she went and knocked on Dumbledore's office door. He answered quickly, as if he'd been expecting her, which she suspected he had. You know, she said, stepping inside. About Quirrell? He moved to his desk. I have suspicions. I have confirmation, she said. I can hear 2 heartbeats. He's sharing his body with someone. She watched his face. You set protections on whatever's at the end of the 3rd floor corridor. Is that what he's after? Dumbledore looked at her with those pale, sharp eyes. What do you know about the Philosopher's Stone, he said. I know enough, she said. I know if someone with no body gets one, they get a body. And a living one is probably worse than the one currently on offer. She sat down in the chair across his desk without being invited. Here's what I'm going to say, and I want you to hear it as clearly as I can say it. Harry does not go anywhere near that corridor. The protections are for a 12-foot mountain troll, among other things, she said. A 12-foot mountain troll is not a meaningful obstacle to Harry and you know it. She met his eyes. Whatever is behind those doors, whatever traps you've laid, Harry does not engage with any of it. If Voldemort makes a move on that stone, I handle it. Directly. Are we clear? Dumbledore was quiet. He needs a normal year, Kara said. Or as normal as this place gets. He needs to be a student, not a soldier. Not yet. Maybe not ever, if I have anything to say about it. Some things, Dumbledore said carefully, cannot be, don't, she said. Don't tell me about destiny and prophecy and what must be done. I've heard that argument from people with telescopes the size of cities and it didn't move me then either. She stood. He's 11. He gets to be 11. Dumbledore looked at her for a long moment. Something in his expression was doing the thing she'd seen it do before, the complex, private, painful reckoning of a man who was very smart and very used to being right and was slowly, reluctantly, discovering the shape of his own limits. Very well, he said. For now. Good, she said. Also your defense professor is being warned by a Dark Lord. You might want to address that at some point. She left his office and went back to Hagrid's and had another enormous cup of tea and watched the castle through the window with its lit windows and its moving staircases and its 11-year-old boy somewhere in the tower learning to be extraordinary. She didn't tell Harry about Quirrell that night. Or the next morning. She had breakfast with him and Hermione and Ron, and she let Ron ask 17 questions about flight speeds and she answered 8 of them, and she watched Harry at the Gryffindor table, comfortable, present, engaged, already woven into the social fabric of the place in the organic, effortless way that came naturally to someone who genuinely liked people, and she decided that he'd find out about Quirrell when he found out, and in the meantime she had done what she'd come to do. She left after breakfast. Harry walked her to the main doors, Hermione and Ron peeling off tactfully, and they stood in the autumn morning light on the stone steps with the ground spread out below them. Something happened last night, Harry said. Not a question. The troll, she said. Not just the troll. He looked at her with those green eyes that missed nothing. Something else. You went somewhere after. She considered him. I had a conversation with Dumbledore. About? About making sure you have a good year, she said. Without complications. He studied her. You found something, he said. Something about the corridor on the third floor. Harry, I know about the corridor, he said. Everyone knows about the corridor. Dumbledore told us not to go there at the start of term, which means at least half the school immediately wants to know what's in it. He met her eyes. I haven't gone. I haven't been planning to go. But I should know what's there. She looked at him for a moment. 11 years old, robes slightly rumpled from breakfast, hair entirely its own business as always, and she thought about what kind of person she was raising and what she owed him. It's something Voldemort wants, she said. Something that could help him come back fully. Dumbledore's protecting it here as a last resort because it was the safest location available. She met his eyes. I've told Dumbledore that if Voldemort makes a move on it, I handle it. Not you. Harry was quiet for a moment. And if you're not here, he said. I will be, she said. Close enough. But if, Harry. She looked at him steadily. You're allowed to trust me. He held her gaze. Then, slowly, he nodded. Okay, he said. But I want to know if anything changes. You'll know, she said. He looked at her for another moment, something working behind his eyes, and then nodded again and seemed to settle it. Okay. He stepped back. Come back at Christmas. I'll be here before Christmas, she said. But yes. Christmas too. He smiled, the full one, the one that was all him. Good. He turned to go back inside, then stopped and turned back. Kara? Yeah. I like it here, he said. I really like it here. I wanted you to know that. I know, she said. I can hear it in your letters. He grinned. Then he was gone, back through the great doors, and she stood on the steps for a moment with the cold Scottish morning air and the sound of the school waking up all around her. She took off from the steps, straight up, no run up, vertical like a column of light, and turned south toward London and let herself move fast, the way she let herself move when she needed to feel the edges of herself. 40 miles out she slowed and hovered and looked back at the faint darkness against the hills that was Hogwarts. The situation with Quirrell reached its conclusion in June. Kara had been monitoring it, not intrusively, not constantly, but with the particular attentiveness she gave things that had Voldemort adjacent to them, which was considerable. She'd been close. She'd stayed close. But Harry found it first. Not because she'd failed. Because Voldemort had specifically engineered it that way, had pulled strings from inside Quirrell's skull and moved chess pieces with the cold intelligence she'd been warned about and hadn't quite fully appreciated until she was standing outside the third-floor corridor listening to it happen. Harry had gone in because Hermione had found out the stone was in danger of being taken that night, and because Harry's instinct when the people around him were threatened was not to wait and was never going to be to wait, and because sometimes Kara arrived 30 seconds after the plan was already in motion. She went through the protections without pausing, the giant three-headed dog, which she moved with rather less ceremony than it probably expected, the devil's snare, the chess pieces, the logic puzzle, and she arrived in the final chamber to find Harry standing between Quirrell and the mirror of Eriste with the stone in his hand and a look on his face that was not fear but something more complex, something that understood exactly what it was confronting. Quirrell's hands were burning where they'd touched him. The protection from his mother, old, deep, sacrificial magic, was doing what sacrificial magic does to dark things that reach for what it guards. Kara crossed the chamber in the time it takes a thought to complete. She did not hit Quirrell hard. She was precise about it, a level of controlled force that removed him from the equation without removing him from existence, because whatever Quirrell had become, there was still a person in there somewhere and she was precise about those distinctions. He went down. The voice from inside him made a sound that was partly Quirrell's pain and partly something older and stranger, and then a tendril of darkness tore free of Quirrell and rushed toward the door and dissipated against the chamber wall. Not destroyed. She knew that. Displaced, scattered, sent to reform somewhere else from something smaller. But not here. Not tonight. Not near Harry. Harry was standing with the stone in his hand and a bleeding cut above his eyebrow from where Quirrell had gotten a hand in before she'd arrived, and he was looking at her with those green eyes that were a little wild and completely steady at the same time. "I had it," he said. "I know you did," she said. He was burning. From me. He couldn't hold on. "I know," she said. "You were extraordinary." She looked at the cut above his eye. "You're bleeding." "Minor," he said, touching it. "I'm fine." "Let me see." She crossed to him and looked at the cut. His hands were also red, scorched slightly where Quirrell had grabbed his wrist in the struggle. She covered both his hands with hers, not the crushing protective way, just the warm, steady way that meant "I'm here." "I was scared for a moment," Harry said. "At the beginning. When he grabbed me." He said it without embarrassment, as a simple fact. "And then I wasn't." The scared part lasted maybe 5 seconds. 5 seconds is fine, she said. "Did you get him?" "Not permanently," she said honestly. "He'll be back, eventually. Not this form. Something smaller, something that takes time to build from." She met his eyes. "But not tonight, and not near you." Harry nodded. He looked at the stone in his hand, turning it over once. Then he held it out to her. "You should take this," he said. "I don't know that it's safe with me." She took it. "Dumbledore will want it destroyed," she said. "Good," Harry said. "Do that." He looked around the chamber, at the unconscious Quirrell, at the shattered chess pieces visible through the passage, at the smoldering devil's snare retreating from the light. "Does this happen every year?" he said. "I hope not," she said. "Because I want to say, academically speaking, this has been an excellent year, and I'd like to continue having excellent years, but maybe without the Dark Lord portion." "That's a reasonable preference," Kara said. "I thought so." He looked at her. "You were fast." "I'm always fast." "I know," he said. "But tonight felt," he stopped. "Thank you." "Don't," she said. "Don't thank me for that." "That's not," she shook her head. "You don't thank family for showing up." He looked at her with something in his expression she couldn't quite name, not the gratitude he'd just been offering, something deeper, something that had been accumulating over years and was in this moment sitting very close to the surface. "Okay," he said. "I just wanted to say it anyway." "I know you did." She looked at him, 12 years old now, since June had started, blood on his forehead and scorched hands and holding himself with the upright ease of someone who'd just gone through something significant and was still standing exactly as tall. "You did well, Harry." "Really?" Something moved in his face. The deep thing, the accumulated thing, moving closer to the surface. Then he got himself together, the way he always did, not suppressing it, just holding it at the right distance, and said, "Can we go up? I'm very hungry and I'd like to eat approximately everything." "The feast is probably still happening," Kara said. "Then let's not waste it," he said. They walked back through the chamber toward the passage, Harry picking up his wand from where it had rolled across the floor, tucking it back into his robes with the ease of someone who'd already developed the habit. In the passage with the chess pieces he stopped and looked at the wreckage of the Black Queen with an expression that was assessment rather than sentiment. "She was quite well programmed," he said. "Tactically sound. You noticed that while she was trying to take you out?" Kara said. "I notice things when I'm scared," he said. "It helps." She thought about that as they went back through the dog's chamber, the dog now deeply asleep against the wall, none the worse for its encounter with a Kryptonian, and through the trapdoor and up and out, and she thought about what it meant that Harry Potter, at 12 years old, noticing details while frightened, his instincts honed to precision by 5 years of deliberate growth, was already the person he was going to be. She thought, "I have no idea what's coming. But whatever it is, it has no idea what's coming either." They emerged into the corridor above and Harry straightened his robes and looked at her and said, "Race you to the Great Hall," with the competitive grin that meant he already knew he'd lose and was going to enjoy the attempt. "No flying," she said. "Obviously no flying," he said. "That'd be cheating." He paused. "I'm still going to lose, aren't I?" "Definitely," she said. "Right," he said. 3, 2, he bolted. She let him get to the corner before she caught up, and by the time they arrived at the great hall doors he was laughing and out of breath and she wasn't either of those things, and the doors opened onto the noise and light of the end-of-year feast, and Hermione looked up from the Gryffindor table and saw the blood on Harry's forehead and said, "Oh, for goodness sake, what happened?" And Ron knocked over his pumpkin juice reaching across to look, and Harry sat down and started filling a plate. And launched into the story, and Kara stood in the doorway of the great hall and watched him be exactly, completely, entirely himself. She stayed for the night. McGonagall gave her a guest room without commentary, which Kara suspected represented significant personal growth on McGonagall's part. She sent a message to Clark, "Everything fine, stone secured, more details tomorrow," and sat on the window seat of the guest room in the Scottish dark, the castle quiet around her. The stone was in her jacket pocket, warm against her side. Tomorrow she'd give it to Dumbledore and have the conversation about destroying it, and Dumbledore would either agree or she'd make it an argument, and either way the stone would cease to be a problem. She took it out and looked at it. Small, red, luminous from inside with something that wasn't quite light. She thought about Krypton, briefly, involuntarily, about the things her people had built and the things those things had cost. About power and what it did to the people who had it and the people who wanted it. About a planet that had known exactly how to make itself last forever and had chosen not to, and about a boy with lightning in his scar who had turned dark magic back on itself at 12 months old and done it again tonight at 12 years, because something in him simply refused to be extinguished. She put the stone back in her pocket. Somewhere in Gryffindor Tower, Harry was asleep. She could hear his heartbeat, steady, deep, the good sleep of someone who'd done something hard and come through it. She thought about what Ollivander had said in the wand shop, terrible and great. She thought, yes. Both. Definitely both. She was looking forward to it. Chapter 4, The Space Between Worlds. The summer after first year was different from the summers before it. Harry came home off the Hogwarts Express taller by 2 inches and brighter by something that wasn't measurable in inches, and he walked through the door of the Notting Hill house and dropped his trunk in the hallway and stood in the kitchen for a moment just breathing it in, the specific smell of the house, Clark's coffee and Kara's books and whatever was in the garden this time of year, and then he said, "Right, I'm making dinner tonight," and went to wash his hands. Clark looked at Kara over Harry's back. Kara shrugged. Some things didn't need commentary. What the summer had that the previous ones hadn't was a certain quality of ease. Not relaxation exactly, Harry was constitutionally incapable of being idle for more than approximately 40 minutes before he found something to engage with, but ease. He wasn't settling back in. He was simply home, in the way that people are home when home is a fixed point rather than a provisional arrangement. He read in the garden and wrote letters to Hermione and Ron and argued with Clark about cricket, which Harry had developed an opinion about that summer on the grounds that it was the most strategically complex game in common English usage, and Clark's counterargument that it was very slow was, in Harry's view, a Philistine position. Kara stayed out of the cricket argument. She had no strong feelings about cricket and a great deal of entertainment watching Harry defend it with the intensity he brought to things he'd recently decided mattered. He was also, she noticed, different in a way she was still mapping. The first year had done something to the quality of his self-knowledge, deepened it, given it texture, run it through experiences that had tested it and found it solid. He knew what he was capable of now in a way that was no longer theoretical. And he carried that differently than she'd expected, not with the swagger of someone who'd proven a point, but with a kind of quiet assurance that had nothing to prove. He asked better questions too. They'd always been good questions. Harry's questions had always been the kind that got to the actual center of things, but now they had the specific precision of someone who understood enough context to ask about the edges. One evening in late July he came to find her in the garden where she was sitting on the back step reading, and he sat beside her and said, "Tell me about Krypton." She looked at him. "You never talk about it," he said. "Clark talks about it occasionally. But you don't." He met her eyes. "You don't have to. I want to know. If you want to tell me." She thought about the 100 times she'd almost told him. The 100 times she'd decided there was a better moment, a more appropriate time. "It was beautiful," she said. "In the way that things are beautiful when you take them for granted. I didn't know I was taking it for granted until it was gone." She looked at the garden, the last of the summer light catching the plants Harry had insisted on planting along the back wall. The science was extraordinary. We understood things about the universe that this planet is still centuries from knowing. And we destroyed ourselves anyway. She paused. That part, the gap between knowing and choosing, I think about that a lot. Harry was quiet for a moment. "Like knowing you should leave someone alone and choosing to hurt them anyway," he said. "Yes," she said. "Exactly like that. My aunt knew," he said. "She wasn't stupid. She knew what she was doing was wrong and she did it because it made her feel less afraid." He turned the idea over with the careful precision he gave things that mattered. "I don't hate her for it. No. I did for a bit," he said honestly. "I was quite furious for about a year after we left. And then," he paused. "And then I realized being furious at her was giving her space in my head that I'd rather have for other things." He shrugged. "She was afraid of something she didn't understand. That's very human." "You're more generous than I was about it," Kara said. "You were angry on my behalf," he said. "That's different from being angry on your own behalf. Your anger was, it was right." He said it without drama, as a plain acknowledgement. "I just don't need to carry it." She looked at him, 12 years old, sitting on the back step with his elbows on his knees and his hair doing 3 different things at once, and thought, not for the first time, that there was something in the way he processed the world that bypassed stages. He did not feel things. He felt them completely and precisely and then put them exactly where they belonged. "Krypton," she continued, after a moment. "My city was called Candor. There were crystals, everything was crystal, the architecture, the technology, the way we stored information. It looked like the inside of a prism when the sun hit it." She paused. "There were 2 moons. What color was the sun?" "Red," she said. "A deep, constant red. Not blinding like this one. More like, warm. Steady. Like being inside something instead of beside it." She stopped. "I miss the light most. Everything else I've made peace with in various ways. But sometimes the light here feels very sharp." Harry was quiet for a long time. Then, "I understand about missing something you barely had time to have," he said softly. She looked at him. He was looking at the garden, not at her. "My parents," he said. It wasn't an explanation or a bid for sympathy. Just an offering of parallel experience, placed beside hers without any weight attached. "I know," she said. They sat together in the garden until the light went fully and Clark came to the doorway and said dinner was going cold, and Harry got up and went inside, and Kara sat for one more moment on the step in the dark. Second year arrived with considerably less ceremony and considerably more snakes. Harry came back to Hogwarts on the train. Kara had seen him off at King's Cross, same routine, same goodbye, briefer now, not because it meant less but because they'd both found the shape of it, and his letters for the first few weeks were cheerful and busy with the specific busyness of someone who'd left a world and come back to it. New defense teacher, apparently spectacular if slightly full of himself. Quidditch prospects excellent. Hermione attempting to read every book in the library by Christmas, currently on track. Then the voice started. "Heard something odd in the walls today," a letter in October said. "A voice that no one else seems to be able to hear. Ron thinks I'm imagining it. Hermione is researching. It sounded, I don't know how to describe it. Hungry. And coming from inside the walls, not from any room. I'm not worried. I just wanted you to know. Kara wrote back, keep me posted. Don't follow it anywhere alone. He wrote back, obviously. She smiled, despite the specific quality of cold that had settled in her chest when she'd read the first letter. The attack on Mrs. Norris happened in November, and Harry's letter about it was detailed and precise and contained the specific frustrated energy of someone unjustly accused. People are looking at me like I did it, which is interesting because the creature that actually did it left a message on the wall about the Chamber of Secrets opening, and I think if I'd been responsible for something I'd probably not have stood next to it reading the message out loud with everyone else, and then a postscript, Scar. Pulsed. When I was standing there looking at the message. Once, hard. Haven't told Ron or Hermione yet. She called Mrs. Figg immediately. Chamber of Secrets, Mrs. Figg said, with the tone of someone who had hoped very much never to hear those words. Oh dear. Tell me everything, Kara said. She learned about Salazar Slytherin and his monster and the heir who could speak to serpents and what the chamber was supposed to contain. She listened with the same thorough attention she gave everything and then said, Harry is a Parselmouth. Yes, Mrs. Figg said. Is that connected to the chamber? It might be connected to, Mrs. Figg paused. To the night his parents died. To Voldemort. There's a theory, she hesitated, as if deciding whether this was her information to share. A theory that some of Voldemort's abilities transferred to Harry along with the scar. Accidentally. In the process of the curse. Kara was quiet for a moment. She thought about what she'd heard outside Quirrell's office last year. She cannot be controlled by the usual methods. She thought about the 2 heartbeats in one chest. She thought about a voice that survived being torn from its host and went looking for another one. Pieces of Voldemort can survive detachment from his main form, she said. Theoretically, Mrs. Figg, Kara said. Don't theoretically me. Is it possible? A pause. Yes, she said. It's possible. How many pieces are we talking about? Another pause, longer. That's not something I know. That's information at a level I was never given access to. But Dumbledore might know. Dumbledore, Mrs. Figg said carefully, knows many things. Kara put the phone down and sat with that for several minutes. Then she called Clark. I need to fly back to Hogwarts, she said. Harry? Clark said immediately. Not in immediate danger, she said. But there's something I need to understand and I need Dumbledore to tell me directly. Clark was quiet for a moment. Are you going to give him the chance to tell you voluntarily or is this going to be one of those conversations? That depends entirely on how quickly he chooses to be straightforward, Kara said. Ah, Clark said. I'll leave dinner. Dumbledore was straightforward. That surprised her, actually. She'd gone to his office prepared for the version where he gave her partial information wrapped in metaphors, but instead he looked at her across his desk with those pale eyes and said, I suspect you've come to ask about Horcruxes. She sat down. Tell me everything, she said. He told her everything. Or as close to everything as he currently knew, which was not complete but was more than she'd had. Horcruxes, the word itself required getting past a particular resistance in the ear, something that her Kryptonian sensory biology registered as inherently wrong, an object that shouldn't exist according to the logic of matter, were objects containing fragments of a soul, created through murder, anchoring a person to existence past their natural end. Voldemort had made them. Plural. The number was unknown. At least one was confirmed to be in circulation, the diary, which they believed was currently at Hogwarts and which was connected to the chamber. Harry's scar, Dumbledore said, with the care of someone who had been carrying a terrible thing for a long time and was relieved, in some small painful way, to put it down, might be another one. An accidental one, made not through deliberate ritual but through the specific catastrophic excess of a killing curse that had nowhere else to go. Kara sat with that for a very long moment. "Does Harry know?" she said. "No," Dumbledore said. I had intended, eventually, when," she said. "When were you going to tell him?" "It is not a simple thing to, when," she said, very quietly. Dumbledore looked at her. "When it became relevant to what needed to be done," he said. And in his voice she heard the thing she'd heard before, the architecture of the plan, the long game, the cold mathematics of sacrifice that intelligent people construct when they're looking at the problem from a sufficient distance that the human cost becomes abstract. She felt the specific cold again. Sharper this time. "You intend for him to die," she said. Not loud. Not hot. Cold and clear and precise. "I intend for him to survive," Dumbledore said. "But there is a possibility. A version of events in which the connection must be, no," Kara said. "Miss Danvers, no," she said again. "I want to be absolutely clear, Professor Dumbledore. Whatever version of events you've planned that involves Harry dying, even temporarily, even necessarily, even with the best possible intention, that version of events is not the version that happens. Because I will be there, and I will be paying attention, and there is no force on this planet or any other that prevents me from getting to him." She held his gaze. "Find another way. Magic has constraints, so does physics," she said. "I've broken physics before." She stood. "Find another way. You're one of the most intelligent people I've ever encountered, and I am telling you that the problem is solvable because the alternative is not acceptable. So solve it." She moved toward the door, then stopped. "And destroy the diary before it does what it's designed to do. The monster in the chamber, I'll deal with it, if it comes to that." "Where does it live?" "A basilisk," Dumbledore said. "In the pipes. It can move through the plumbing of the castle." He paused. "Its gaze is lethal." "To humans," Kara said. A pause. Yes. To humans." "Right," she said. "Keep the students out of the corridors at night." She dealt with the basilisk in February. It was not a small basilisk. It was, in fact, the largest living snake she'd encountered, and she'd once helped relocate an Amazonian boa that had been used in an ill-conceived smuggling operation. The Hogwarts basilisk made that boa look like a garden ornament. It filled the pipes it moved through, and when it entered the chamber itself, she'd found the entrance through a bathroom sink and gone down without particular ceremony. It filled most of that too. She kept her eyes closed for the descent, using her other senses, listening to the specific rhythm of something that large moving through water. The basilisk didn't seem to know what to make of her. She'd expected it to strike immediately, but instead it stopped, coiled in the flooded chamber floor, and she could hear it, not in her ears but in that other sense, the one Harry had inherited through Voldemort, the one that made snakes a language rather than just noise, assessing. The way very old creatures assess things they've never encountered before. She wasn't going to kill it. That was her first decision, made before she'd come down here. There were things you killed because they had to be killed, and things you dealt with differently when dealing with them differently was possible. A basilisk trained by a long-dead dark wizard to obey Slytherin's heir was not the basilisk's fault. She spoke to it. Not in Parseltongue, she didn't have that. But she had the harmonic resonance that Kryptonian biology gave her, the ability to produce sounds at frequencies that bypass standard sensory processing, and she'd learned, in years of handling things too large for conventional methods, that extremely old creatures responded to frequency in ways they didn't respond to anything else. She sang at the basilisk for 45 minutes. It was not dignified. It was also completely effective. The basilisk, gradually and with the specific reluctance of something that had been a weapon for 1,000 years and wasn't entirely sure what else to be, uncurled and lay flat and listened, and by the end of it she had communicated, not in words, not in language, but in the particular emotional spectrum that transcended both, that it was being relocated rather than destroyed, and that the new location would have considerably more room and considerably less pipe. She brought it to the North Sea. It seemed pleased, in the way ancient reptiles register pleasure, which is mostly through the absence of obvious displeasure. She told Harry about it at Christmas. He stared at her. They were in the kitchen, mugs in hand, the house warm with the particular warmth of December and Clark's excessive approach to decorating. Hermione and Ron were coming the day after Christmas, Hermione's parents sending her with the relieved expressions of people who adored their daughter and found her considerably more comfortable when she had somewhere to direct her energy, and the house had been reorganized to accommodate guests without entirely losing its character. "You sang it into cooperation," Harry said. "Yes," she said. "The basilisk. The thing that's been petrifying people for months. It's in the North Sea now," she said. "It seems happy. As happy as basilisks get." "Kara," he said, with the expression that meant he was caught between exasperation and absolute delight. "You could have just told it to go." "I don't speak Parseltongue," she said. "You do. You could have told me to tell it to go. You were in class." He stared at her. "It's a basilisk." "Yes, and the school year was mostly over by February and I didn't want to interrupt your OWL preparation. I'm 12, I don't have OWL. Exactly, so you were free to focus on your regular work undistracted," she said, with the expression she used when she was being entirely deliberate and wanted him to know she knew he knew it. Harry put his mug down. Put it back up. Drank from it. Put it down again. "The diary," he said, shifting topics with the efficiency of someone who'd filed basilisk relocated, query closed. "Someone had it. Someone at school. A student. Ginny Weasley," Kara said. "It was passed to her through her father's books. Deliberately. Someone planted it." Harry was quiet. "It was possessing her," he said. "Writing to her through the diary and drawing energy from her." "Yes," she said. "Because there was a piece of Voldemort in it." The quiet that followed was a different kind of quiet. She looked at him. He was looking at his mug. "You know about the Horcruxes," she said. "Not a question." "I worked it out," he said. "In October. I was thinking about what you said when we dealt with Quirrell, that Voldemort survives because he's anchored. And I started thinking about what anchored means, magically, and the diary, the way it behaved, the way writing back through it felt like talking to something that had its own agenda. It wasn't just enchanted. It was inhabited." He looked up. "Dumbledore knows." "Yes. There are more." "Yes," she said carefully. "We don't know how many." He nodded. His face was doing the thing it did when it was processing something large, not shutting down, never shutting down, but taking the full weight of the thing and distributing it evenly. "Is one of them," he stopped. Touched his scar. Looked at her. "Harry," she said. "Is it me?" he said. Just that. Clear and direct and completely without panic. She made the decision in the space of 2 seconds, and she made it the way she made all her important decisions, not around what was comfortable or what was gentle but around what was true and what he deserved. "There's a possibility," she said. "An unconfirmed one. Dumbledore believes it may be, that the scar may contain, part of him," Harry said. "Yes." He was quiet for a long time. She let him be quiet, didn't fill the space, didn't offer comfort prematurely. He was working through something and he worked better without interference, always had. "Okay," he said eventually. "Okay," she said. "I mean, not okay, obviously," he said. "That's a genuinely terrible thing to find out. I'm going to feel things about that for a while." He looked at her. "But knowing it changes what I need to think about. If there's something of him in me, I need to know how that works. What it does. Whether it's something I can," he paused. "Whether it's something that can be separated without," another pause. "We're working on that," Kara said. "I promise you we're working on that. You told Dumbledore not to let me die," he said. It wasn't quite a question. "Yes," she said. He had a plan that involved, he no longer has that plan, she said. Harry looked at her with the green eyes that always saw exactly what was there. You terrified him. I was very calm, she said. Yes, Harry said. That's what I mean. She almost smiled. He almost did too, and then didn't quite, because the weight of what they were discussing was real and he was always honest about real weight. Thank you, he said. For fighting for that. For fighting for me being, he stopped. Alive, she said. I was going to say whole, he said quietly. For me being whole. She looked at him, 12 years old, green eyes, terrible hair, sitting at the kitchen table in his own home having just been told he might contain a piece of the most dangerous dark wizard in a century, and meeting it with the same clear, steady refusal to be diminished by it that he'd brought to everything since the very first night in that cupboard when he'd whispered it's okay into the dark and meant it as a vow rather than a comfort. Always, she said. Simple as that. He nodded. Picked up his mug. Drank from it. Tell Ron and Hermione about Christmas dinner being early, he said. They'll want to know what time to arrive. Already done, she said. And Clark's got the tree from last year, hasn't he? The big one. He mentioned, already done, she said. He smiled, small, genuine, the specific smile that wasn't for anyone's benefit. Good, he said. Third year came in and changed everything again. The Dementors arrived at Hogwarts in September, stationed at the gates as guards on Fudge's orders because Sirius Black had escaped from Azkaban and the Ministry believed he was coming for Harry. Kara received the letter from Hogwarts about the Dementor deployment before Harry could write to her about it and called Dumbledore before dinner. They are not touching him, she said, without greeting. The Dementors are under Ministry jurisdiction. I don't care if they're under the jurisdiction of the universe itself, she said. They are not touching him. I need you to understand that. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. They affect everyone, he said. Their nature doesn't distinguish, then keep them at the gates and nowhere else, she said. And tell Professor Lupin I said hello. She'd done her research on the new defense teacher. Remus Lupin had been friends with James Potter, which made him someone she wanted to understand before he got near Harry, and what she'd understood, from Mrs. Figg, from a conversation with an Auror contact she'd developed over 2 years, was that he was one of the good ones. Genuinely. A man who had been ground down by things beyond his control and kept choosing decency anyway. She trusted him provisionally, which for Kara was roughly equivalent to most people's complete trust. The Dementors touched Harry anyway, because of course they did. His letters in October described it with the particular detail of someone who had decided to understand a thing by examining it from every angle. It wasn't fear exactly. It was like someone turned a dial on the frequency of every bad memory until they were all happening at once. Green light. My mother's voice. The sound of Quirrell in the chamber. I heard my mother, Kara. For the first time. Actually heard her voice. I wasn't prepared for what that would feel like. She called him from a payphone outside Hogsmeade, which she discovered was possible if you knew the right frequency to use on the Ollery communication system, a fact she'd figured out through trial and error the previous year and had kept as a contingency. He answered on the third ring, his voice careful and neutral in the way it got when he was managing something. I know, he said, before she said anything. I'm all right. I know you are, she said. I'm not calling because I think you're not all right. I'm calling because I want to hear your voice. A pause. Then, softly, I heard her. In the corridor when they came on the train. She was talking to him. Asking him to take her instead. His voice was steady, carefully steady. She was 21 years old. Yes, Kara said. She sounds like, he stopped. I thought she'd sound like someone else. Like someone from a story. But she just sounds like a person. A young person. She was, Kara said. I'm going to learn the Patronus charm, he said. A decision, not a plan. Professor Lupin says it's advanced magic, but I'm going to learn it. I have absolutely no doubt, she said. Good. A pause. Kara. Yeah. Can you come at Easter? Not because I'm coming at Easter, she said. I was going to anyway. Okay, he said. Good. Another pause, briefer. I think Sirius Black is innocent. She stopped. What makes you say that? Because the thing I've learned about people who are guilty of something terrible is that they justify it, he said. They build a story around themselves that makes what they did necessary. But from everything I've read, from everything people who knew him have said, Sirius Black didn't build that story. He just went into Azkaban. He paused. Innocent people don't need stories. She stood outside the Hogsmeade payphone in the October dark thinking about that. Have you told anyone this? Hermione thinks I'm being charitable. Ron is uncomfortable because the Weasleys think Black is guilty. He paused. But Hermione does her own research when she thinks I might be right about something, even when she argues with the premise. I expect she'll have opinions by December. She usually does, Kara said. Yes, he said, with considerable affection. Sirius Black's innocence was confirmed in a complicated and unsatisfying way at the end of June, in the sequence of events Kara had been monitoring with increasing agitation since March, the truth about Peter Pettigrew, the revelation about Lupin's condition, Pettigrew's escape, Sirius recaptured, and then the time-turner. Hermione had a time-turner. She and Harry had used it to free Sirius, who had escaped on a hippogriff named Buckbeak into a sky that Kara had been watching from above, close enough to intervene if needed, far enough to let it be theirs. She'd seen the hippogriff clear the tower and watched the figure on its back become small against the clouds and thought, 13 years old, and he just freed an innocent man and turned time backwards to do it. She'd also, from her height, seen the moment earlier in the same night when the Dementor had gotten close enough to make Harry fall from his broom. She had maintained, with considerable effort, the altitude she'd been at. Letting Harry be 13 and capable was not the same as not caring. She understood that. She'd worked hard to understand it. The version of love that grabbed everything that could possibly go wrong and refused to let it happen was not love, it was control with a kind face, and she'd seen what that looked like in Dumbledore's architecture and she wasn't going to be that. But the Dementor had gotten close, and she'd maintained altitude, and that had cost her something, and she sat with the cost quietly and honestly. She met Harry off the train at King's Cross in June and he looked at her and said, "You were there," not accusingly but as a simple fact. "At a distance," she said. "The whole time?" "Parts of it," she said. "The important parts." He looked at her. "The Dementor?" "Yes." He nodded. Something in his face was working through the same thing she'd worked through from the sky, the gap between help that helped and help that didn't. "I wasn't going to die," he said. "From the fall. I mean, I was going to be hurt, but, I know," she said. "I knew that. That's why I stayed where I was." He held her gaze. "Thank you," he said. For not catching me." It was such an odd thing to thank someone for. Such a precise, honest, Harry thing. She felt something move in her chest, not the familiar guardian feeling, not the warmth of family, something else. Something that had been accumulating for 3 years of letters and visits and phone calls and late evenings in the garden, and that she kept in its careful place, properly filed, for exactly these reasons. "You're welcome," she said. He nodded and moved toward where Clark was waiting with the car, and Kara stood a moment on the platform. She was aware, very precisely, of two things, that Harry was 13 and she was 29, and that those numbers were going to change, and that the way they were going to change was already doing something she needed to stay honest about. She picked up the nearest piece of luggage and followed. That summer was the summer of arguments. Not with Harry. With Clark. They'd been having the argument in installments since Harry had been about 11, in the specific incremental way of two people who loved the same person and had different ideas about what that meant. But that summer it came to a head in the kitchen at 2 in the morning after Harry had gone to bed, and Clark leaned against the counter with his arms crossed and said, "Kara. You have to know what's happening." "I know what's happening," she said. "Then you know you need to." "I'm handling it," she said. "Handling it how?" "Because what I see is, Clark." She looked at him directly. "I know the situation. I know the ages. I know what's appropriate and what isn't. I'm not a child and I'm not asking for your permission or your management." She paused. "What I'm doing is what I've been doing since he was 6, which is making sure he has what he needs and staying out of the way of what he doesn't need. What he doesn't need is me complicating his life." She met Clark's eyes. "So I'm not complicating it." Clark looked at her for a long moment. "What happens when he's not 13, he said. "I'll deal with that when we're not at 13, she said. "Kara, Clark. I've been on this planet for 16 years. I've learned one thing about human feelings that actually transfers: you don't manage them by running from them. You manage them by knowing exactly what they are and choosing what to do about them accordingly." She turned away from him toward the window. "I know what they are. I'm choosing appropriately." She paused. "He's my family. That's the only thing that matters right now. Everything else is mine to handle." Clark was quiet for a long time. "Okay," he said finally. "Okay. I mean, I'm going to worry about it," he said. "Because that's apparently what I do. But okay. Worry quietly," she said. "I'll try," he said. He uncrossed his arms. "He's a good kid, Kara." "I know," she said. "Whatever happens, whenever it happens, he's going to be good at it." He paused. "He's going to care about you in a way he already does. He already cares about you in a way He stopped, seeming to find the sentence too complicated to finish. "I know," she said again, softer. Clark nodded and went to bed. Kara stood at the kitchen window for a long time, watching the dark garden and the park beyond and London blinking and moving beyond that, and she thought about a 6-year-old in a cupboard whispering it's okay and a 12-year-old saying I want to be whole and a 13-year-old thanking her for not catching him. She thought about all the space between worlds, between hers and his, between Krypton and magic, between 29 and 13 that would become 29 and 14 and 29 and 15, closing, not quickly but honestly. She thought about the specific shape of feelings you're not going to act on but have to be honest with yourself about, because dishonesty about feelings didn't make them smaller. It just made them harder to handle when they became relevant. She thought, 3 more years. He'll be 16 in 3 more years. And then you can stop filing things away and start actually figuring out what they mean. The garden was quiet. The park beyond rustled with the specific quality of July nights. Somewhere upstairs Harry slept the easy sleep of someone who had had a hard year and made it through completely intact, who had freed an innocent man and learned the Patronus charm and heard his mother's voice and come home to cook dinner and argue about cricket as if none of it was too much to hold. She turned away from the window and went to bed. Chapter 5, The Tournament and the War. Nobody declared the summer before 4th year. Harry grew another 3 inches and developed an opinion about coffee. Kara noticed the 3 inches immediately. He came downstairs the first morning home and was suddenly, undeniably, at eye level with her, which required a small recalibration that she performed without commentary. She noticed the coffee opinion when he appeared in the kitchen at 7 in the morning and went directly to the pot with the focused purposefulness of someone who had discovered a thing and intended to have it. "Since when?" she said. "Since Hermione introduced me to it in June," he said, pouring a mug with the ease of someone who'd been doing it for years. "It turns out I was just tired all the time and had assumed that was a normal state." "You were 14 and sleeping 6 hours a night," Kara said. "I had a lot to read," he said, entirely without apology. He sat at the table and drank his coffee and read, and Kara sat across from him and drank hers and read, and they had breakfast in companionable silence in the way they developed over years of early mornings together, and it was exactly the same as it had always been and also somehow not, the way summer mornings became different not because the light changed but because the person sitting in it did. He was 14. He was tall, he was confident, he was sharper every year in ways that had nothing to do with cleverness and everything to do with becoming himself more completely. He laughed more openly now than he had at 11 or 12, not that he'd been closed then, but now the laugh started faster, lived closer to the surface. He argued about more things, not combatively but with the genuine engaged energy of someone who had ideas and wanted to test them. He'd started writing, not just letters, but actual writing, pages that he kept in a notebook he didn't show anyone and that Kara absolutely did not read because she had boundaries and also because she could tell from the way he wrote in it that reading it would be an intrusion on something private that was still becoming. Ron came for 2 weeks in July. Hermione came for a week in August. The house was loud in the way Kara had discovered she loved, the specific loud of young people being completely themselves, Hermione's perpetual reading and Ron's perpetual eating and Harry navigating between them like a person who understood everyone's frequency and adjusted his own accordingly. She'd watched him do it a dozen times and it never got less remarkable, the way he made space for people without losing his own space, the way he could be fully present with Ron's easy humor and fully present with Hermione's precise intensity and be recognizably the same person doing both. He's going to be extraordinary at whatever he decides to do with people, Hermione said once, to Kara, in the garden. It was the end of Hermione's week and they were outside while Harry and Ron engaged in some kind of disagreement about Quidditch inside that didn't require witnesses. Hermione said it with the specific assessment tone, the one that processed people the way it processed texts. Not just politically. I mean as a person. He makes people feel, she seemed to search for the right word. Significant. Without even trying. I know, Kara said. Hermione looked at her in the particular way she sometimes looked at things she was deciding whether to pursue. Then she looked back at the garden and didn't pursue it. Kara appreciated that about Hermione more than she'd ever said out loud. The Quidditch World Cup was in August. Harry came back from 3 nights camping in the Weasley contingent with grass stains and a Ireland one but Crumb caught the snitch energy and the disturbing report that someone had used the dark mark over the campsite afterward, which Kara had already heard from 3 other sources and was tracking with the specific focused attention she gave things that meant Voldemort's networks were becoming active again. She filed the dark mark with everything else she'd been filing. The something else had been accumulating all summer in fragments, a rumor here, an intelligence report there, 2 conversations with people in Dumbledore's orbit who didn't realize how well she could read between the lines. The picture being assembled was not a comfortable one. Voldemort's remaining fragments were consolidating. His followers were mobilizing. The war that most people were still calling a past thing, a solved thing, was becoming a present thing again, and the people who were supposed to be paying attention were either not paying it or paying it too quietly. She said something to Dumbledore in the last week of August. Not for the first time. I know, he said. Then say it publicly, she said. Stop letting Fudge pretend, Fudge will not listen, Dumbledore said. And if I push too hard, too fast, he will remove me from Hogwarts, and then Harry is at Hogwarts without you, she said. Precisely, he said. She understood the logic. She still hated it. There has to be a way to, there may be, he said. Something is coming this year. An event. It will bring people together in ways that, he paused. The Triwizard Tournament is being reinstated. She looked at him. I've heard of it. Then you know it has a minimum age requirement, he said. 17. Harry is 14. Why are you telling me this as though it's a comfort, she said. Because I want you to understand that I have taken precautions, he said. An age line. A goblet of fire that can't be fooled by a 17-year-old, she said. What about someone with considerably more sophisticated magic than a 17-year-old? Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. No system is infallible, he said finally. No, she said. They're not. She went home and told Clark the Triwizard Tournament was being reinstated and watched him do the mental math. Harry's 14, Clark said. Yes, she said. The minimum age is, yes, she said. So he won't be, Clark, she said. What do we know about Harry's relationship with rules designed to protect him? Clark considered this. He respects the principle of them, Clark said carefully. But he tends to decide case by case whether the rule is actually protective in his specific instance or whether it's just a rule. Yes, she said. Clark picked up his coffee mug, put it down. How worried are you? I'm paying attention, she said. Which is my version of very worried. Harry did not enter the Triwizard Tournament. His name came out of the Goblet of Fire anyway. The letter arrived the morning of November 1st in Ptolemy's beak, and the handwriting on the outside was Harry's, and the letter itself was the specific kind of short that meant he was managing something significant with limited space. My name came out last night. I don't know how. I didn't put it in, and I didn't ask anyone to put it in for me. Dumbledore is, I don't know what Dumbledore is actually. McGonagall looked like she'd swallowed something painful. Everyone else seems to think I found a way around the age line. Hermione believes me. Ron doesn't, currently, which is a separate problem. I'm going to compete because apparently there's no way out of it, magical contract, but I want you to know I didn't do this. I'll write more when there's more to say. Kara read it twice, once fast and once carefully, then folded it and held it for a moment. Then she went to the roof. She sat on the edge with London below her and thought, properly, without the social considerations that shaped how she thought in rooms with other people. She thought about who had access to the Goblet of Fire, about the sophistication required to confuse a magical artifact old enough to have its own institutional history, about what you'd need to do technically to fool it into believing a fourth entrant was representing a fourth school that didn't exist. She thought, this is a specific thing. This is someone who knows about Harry, who has access to Hogwarts, who has enough magical knowledge to fool a centuries-old magical object, and who wants Harry in that tournament. She thought, what does the Triwizard Tournament give you that you can't get otherwise? She thought about blood, about magical binding, about a ritual she'd read about in one of Mrs. Figg's carefully curated books, a ritual that required a specific kind of enemy, a specific kind of willing participation, and a specific kind of, she was on the phone to Dumbledore in 4 minutes. The final task, she said, without greeting. What's at the center of the maze? A pause. We haven't determined what will be at the center, she said. The portkey. The way out. Where does it go? A longer pause. It hasn't been designated yet, Dumbledore said. His voice had changed. She could hear him catching up to her, his extraordinary intelligence rerouting toward the same conclusion. But you're suggesting, someone put Harry's name in that goblet knowing what the final task would be, she said. Because the final task's exit point can be controlled by whoever controls the maze. And if you control where the portkey goes, you control where Harry ends up, Dumbledore said, very quietly. Yes, she said. Now. Who benefits from Harry ending up somewhere specific? Who needs him physically present for something that requires his blood? Who has a ritual that needs, she stopped, because she'd felt something drop into place with the absolute clarity of the best and worst kind of understanding. The ritual Pettigrew was researching, she said. Before Sirius's trial came apart. There were files. The Aurors had notes about what Pettigrew had been involved in before he faked his death. Someone in the Order shared them with me last spring. Kara, Dumbledore said. Bone of the father, she said. Flesh of the servant. Blood of the enemy. She pressed the phone harder against her ear. That's what this is. All of it. The tournament is a delivery system. The silence on the other end was the silence of a man who had already known this and had been hoping to manage it without naming it. How long have you known, she said. I have suspected, he said. Since the name emerged. But I had no confirmation. Then confirm it and tell me everything you know about where that ritual happens and what it produces, she said. Because we are not letting Harry be a component in Voldemort's resurrection. Not because it's dangerous to Harry, though it is, but because a fully resurrected Voldemort is a problem that gets significantly harder to solve after the fact. She paused. I can solve it before the fact. Give me what I need. Dumbledore gave her what she needed. It took 3 conversations over 4 days and a great deal of what she privately categorized as Dumbledore's reluctance to share information he'd been holding as strategic cards, but she got it, the ritual, the location, the likely timing, and, most usefully, the identity of the person inside Hogwarts who had put Harry's name in the goblet. Bartemius Crouch Jr. Polyjuice Potion. The real Alastor Moody was locked in a magical trunk. She went to Hogwarts on a Thursday. She found Mad-Eye Moody's office, the door with the 7 locks, which she dealt with in the sequence any Hogwarts professor could have dealt with it in if they'd thought to check, and opened the largest lock at the bottom and looked at the real Alastor Moody, alive but badly the worse for 8 months in a magical trunk, and said, "Aurors are coming within the hour. Can you hold on?" "Been holding on since September," Moody rasped. "Who are you?" "Harry Potter's guardian," she said. Moody looked at her with his one real eye and his spinning magical eye simultaneously, which was an unusual experience. "Right," he said. "Then get Crouch." "I will," she said. She found Crouch, the fake Moody, Bartemius Jr., wild-eyed and brilliant and burning with the specific fervor of someone who had sacrificed everything for a belief and called it devotion, in his office, and it was not a long confrontation. He reached for his wand and she caught his wrist and looked at him and said, "You're going to tell me everything you've set up for the final task. Every enchantment, every contingency, the portkey destination, all of it." "You can't stop, I already have," she said. "Tell me the rest." He told her. He had the furious, brittle quality of someone whose entire elaborate construction was being dismantled in real time and who couldn't decide whether to be angry or devastated. She felt something for him that wasn't sympathy but was adjacent to it, the specific sadness of someone watching what devotion to a terrible cause did to a person. He'd been a brilliant man, by all accounts. He was brilliant still. And all of it had been given to this. She handed him to the Aurors Dumbledore had discreetly called and went to find Harry. She found him at dinner, sitting between Hermione and Ron. They'd reconciled in October, some combination of first task survival and Hermione's relentless practical pressure, with his robes slightly ink-stained from what she knew had been a long afternoon in the library. He looked up when she appeared at the doors of the great hall and something in his expression moved, not surprise, not alarm, something more complicated. He excused himself from the table with a word to Hermione and came to the door. "What happened?" he said. "Everything's dealt with," she said. "Or most of it. Come on." They walked to an empty classroom off the main corridor and she sat on a desk and told him all of it, Crouch, Moody, the ritual, the portkey, what she'd done and what Dumbledore was doing and what the Aurors were doing. She told him straight and without softening it, the way she always did, because Harry processed better with complete information than with partial information and she'd known that since he was 9 years old. He listened with the focused attention of someone cataloging every detail. When she finished he was quiet for a moment. "Pettigrew," he said. "He's still out there." "Yes," she said. "Which means Voldemort has a servant," he said. "Even without the ritual." "Yes," she said. "It'll take longer. Without his own body, without the specific thing the ritual gives him, it'll be slower. But he's still coming back, Harry. Slower and smaller, maybe, but still." Harry nodded. His face was doing the processing thing, calm and thorough. "What do we do?" "You finish your year," she said. "You compete in the remaining tasks, legitimately, since Dumbledore's confirmed you're bound to the contract regardless of how you got in, and you do brilliantly because you're going to, and in the meantime I help Dumbledore put things in place that make Voldemort's eventual return as unmanageable for Voldemort as possible. And when he does come back, then we deal with it," she said. "Together. Properly. Not you alone, not me alone. Together." He met her eyes. "You keep saying that. Because I keep meaning it, she said. He looked at her for a moment, with that specific quality of attention he gave things that mattered, the full, direct, undeflected look. She'd gotten used to it over the years, but she hadn't gotten immune to it. The specific weight of being genuinely seen by someone who didn't look at you to find something they needed but looked at you to find out what was actually there. Okay, he said. Together. Then something in the quality of the moment shifted, not dramatically, not signaled by anything she could point to after, it just changed, the way light changes when something moves between you and the source. Harry was looking at her and she was looking at him, and the categories she kept carefully organized in the space between them were doing something she hadn't given them permission to do. Kara, he said. His voice had changed in the way 14-year-old voices change, not fully but noticeably, a different resonance in it than had been there a year ago. Yeah, she said. There's something I've been. He stopped. He looked at the floor, which was unusual because Harry almost never looked away mid-sentence. He seemed to be having an argument with himself about something. Then he looked back up. Never mind. It can wait. She looked at him. She looked at him the same way he looked at things he was deciding about, fully, honestly, without deflection. Okay, she said. It can wait. He nodded. And they both understood what had been said and what had been understood and what was being given appropriate time, and that was exactly right, and they both knew it. The tournament turned out to be considerably less dangerous without a dark wizard orchestrating it. The first task, dragons, 4 of them, 1 per champion, Harry handled with a combination of his natural flying skill, some very creative wand work that made the Hogwarts crowd react the way crowds react to something they haven't seen before, and the complete absence of fear that Kara had been cultivating in him since he was 6. The Hungarian horntail was formidable, and Harry went around it twice at firebolt speed and then above it, came down on the blind side, and had the golden egg in his hand in 3 minutes and 40 seconds. Kara was in the stands. Dumbledore had given her a guest position, framed as Harry's guardian, which raised eyebrows she didn't care about, and she watched Harry land with the egg under his arm and a grin that was half exhilaration and half satisfaction, and she thought, there it is. There's the person I knew was in there. The second task, underwater, Harry used the gillyweed Hermione had researched and his own magical instinct and an apparently natural comfort with extreme environments that Kara suspected came from years of flying at altitude and just generally being someone who didn't find extraordinary situations frightening. He was first out of the lake. The third task was the maze, now emptied of its portkey problem courtesy of Kara and Dumbledore's intervention, and Harry navigated it with the systematic intelligence of someone who understood that a maze was a problem with a solution and applied himself accordingly. He was first to the cup. He held it up out of the maze in the floodlights of the crowd, and the noise was extraordinary, the British contingent in particular producing the kind of sound that gets made when something happens that feels both inevitable and impossible, and Harry looked up into the stands with the cup in his hand and found her face in the crowd with the unerring accuracy he'd always had for finding her, the way, she sometimes thought, that people can always find North. He grinned. She grinned back. He was Triwizard champion. The celebrations afterward were loud and long, and Kara stood to the side at most of them, happy to be peripheral, watching Harry move through the noise and the people with the ease of someone fully inhabiting their moment. Ron was there, spectacular in his celebratory enthusiasm. Hermione was there, expressing her joy with the contained intensity of someone who'd been holding her breath for 6 months and was now allowed to exhale. Dumbledore was there, looking at Harry with the complex expression she'd been learning to read all year, pride and something older and more private underneath it, some long reckoning that was still in progress. Kara caught Dumbledore's eye across the crowd, and he nodded at her once, with the specific quality of acknowledgement that was as close as he got to gratitude. She nodded back. After, in the corridor outside the Great Hall while the party continued inside, Harry found her. The noise was muffled through the stone walls and the corridor was cool and dim, and he stood there with the cup, they'd given it to him to keep, a tradition, and looked at her. I want to talk to you about something, he said. His voice had done the thing again, the shift she'd been tracking without intending to, and there was something in his posture that was different from the celebratory energy of 5 minutes ago. More private. More careful. Okay, she said. Not now, he said. Not tonight, when there's all this. He gestured toward the noise of the celebration behind the doors. But soon. When it's just us. There's something he paused, chose the word carefully. Carrying. That I'd like to stop carrying. She looked at him. 14 years old. Champion. Green eyes in the dim corridor, completely focused on her. When you come home in June, she said. Yes, he said. Okay, she said. He nodded. A beat of silence that was oddly comfortable, the way silences between people who knew each other well were comfortable, full rather than empty. Thank you, he said. For tonight. For everything you did. Crouch and Moody and all of, you would have handled it, she said. I know, he said. But you handled it first. And that mattered. He shifted the cup in his hands. It mattered that you were there. I'm always there, she said. I know, he said. He stopped, seemed to be selecting carefully again. That's the thing I want to talk about. In June. She held his gaze for a moment. Then, okay, she said, for the third time. He smiled, that full, unguarded smile, and went back through the doors into the noise. Kara stood in the corridor and breathed. She was, by any measure, perfectly calm. She had been calm since the conversation in the empty classroom. She had been appropriately, correctly, precisely managing this in the way she'd been managing it for 2 years, with full honesty about what it was and full honesty about what to do about it. She was also, underneath the calm, holding something that had the exact weight and temperature of anticipation. June, she thought. The summer came in warm and fast, the way good summers do, and Harry came off the Hogwarts Express on the 1st of July and walked toward her on the platform, and there was something different in the walk, not in the physical mechanics of it but in the quality, something that had settled and decided during the 8 months since the corridor. They drove home. They made dinner, the three of them, Clark making pointed conversation about entirely neutral things with the practiced ease of someone who had decided to be supportive by being present and normal, which Kara recognized and appreciated. They ate. Harry and Clark did the dishes while Kara cleared the table, the established choreography of their shared life. Then Clark said something about needing to call Perry White about a story and went upstairs, and it was so obviously deliberate that Kara almost laughed. She and Harry sat in the garden in the late light. He didn't start the conversation immediately. They sat with the comfortable quiet they'd always had, the garden doing its summer evening thing, the park beyond the back wall full of distant voices and the light going warm and gold through the trees. Then Harry said, when I was in the maze. She looked at him. Before I found the cup, there was a boggart in the 3rd section. A boggart, not listed on the official documentation of the maze's contents, probably planted by Crouch's version of Moody before you removed him. He was looking at the garden, not at her. A boggart is supposed to show you your worst fear. I know what a boggart is, she said. Right, he said. So I was prepared for it. For it to show me, Voldemort, or my parents dying, or something dark. Something I'd have to ridiculous away. He paused. It showed me you. She went very still. Not you hurt, he said quickly. Not you dead or frightened or, he stopped. It showed you leaving. Just, leaving. Walking away and not coming back. And I was standing in the maze with a wand pointed at the thing that looked like you walking away from me, and I couldn't say ridiculous. I couldn't make it funny. Because there was nothing funny about it. He finally looked at her. That's what my worst fear is. In case you needed to know. The garden was very quiet. Harry, she said. I know the ages, he said. It came out measured and clear, and she understood immediately that he'd been thinking about this for months, possibly years, in the specific thorough way he thought about things. I know you're 16 years older than me. I know you found me when I was 6 and you're my guardian and I understand all the reasons. I'm not asking for anything, he said. I'm just done carrying it alone. That's all. He met her eyes. You said I don't have to pretend anything to you. That was the first night. I'm holding you to that. She looked at him. 14, going on something much older. Not in the sad, too soon way of children who'd been forced into early gravity, but in the genuine way, the earned way, someone who had grown on purpose, through curiosity and courage and 5 years of deliberate becoming, into a person who knew exactly what they felt and why they felt it and said it directly. She thought about what Clark had said, he's going to care about you in a way that's. She thought about 6 years old in a cupboard and 11 years old on a train platform and 12 years old saying I want to be whole and 13 years old thanking her for not catching him. She thought about 16 years older and about the number 14 and about the careful place she'd been keeping things filed and about the difference between what was true and what was appropriate and how those two things related to time. I know, she said. He looked at her. I know what you're carrying, she said. Because I've been carrying the same thing. She held his gaze. And I'm going to be honest with you because you asked me to be. What I feel isn't small and it isn't. It's not something I can honestly call guardianship anymore and call it the whole truth. She paused. But you're 14. I know I'm 14, he said. So nothing changes, she said. Right now. Nothing changes except that we've both said what's true. She looked at him steadily. But I'm not going to tell you it doesn't exist. I'm not going to file it somewhere false and tell you you're imagining it. That's not honest and you deserve honest. He held her gaze. His face was doing the processing thing, the careful weighing of the thing she'd said. Okay, he said. So it exists. It exists, she said. And nothing changes right now. Right now, she said. But not nothing forever, he said. Harry, she said. I'm not asking, he said quickly. I'm just asking if I understood what you said. She looked at him for a moment, this careful, honest, entirely himself person sitting in her garden in the summer evening light. You understood what I said, she said. Something moved through his face, not triumph, nothing like that, nothing as simple as that. Something deeper. Something that had the quality of a weight being set down. Not resolved, not finished, just, known. Acknowledged. Given the right shape. Okay, he said. His voice was easy. Okay. They sat in the garden until Clark came down and asked loudly whether anyone wanted tea with the specific volume of someone who wanted to signal his approach from a significant distance. Yes please, Harry said, without moving. Already on, Clark called from the kitchen. Harry looked at Kara. He's been upstairs the whole time, hasn't he? Completely fabricated phone call, Kara said. He's terrible at subtlety, Harry said. He's the world's most obvious person who can also become invisible, Kara agreed. Harry laughed, and it was the full laugh, the best one, and the evening held it, and London hummed around them, and something had been said and known and set in its true place, and everything was exactly what it was. The war nobody declared started in August and nobody knew but the people already paying attention. There was a Death Eater movement in Yorkshire, quiet, contained, reported by one orer who was then transferred before the report could be properly investigated. 3 disappearances in the magical community between July and September that the ministry categorized as unrelated. A rise in unexplained magical disturbances that the Department of Magical Accidents filed and forgot. A conversation Kara overheard between 2 fudge aides in a restaurant in Diagon Alley that used the phrase containable concern in a way that meant thing we're pretending isn't happening. She started her own file. She'd been keeping notes informally for 3 years, the dark mark at the World Cup, Pettigrew's escape, the network activation she tracked in fragments of intelligence from 3 different sources. Now she made it systematic. Names, dates, patterns. She had the particular advantage of being someone who operated outside the institutional frameworks of both the wizarding world and the superhero world, which meant she wasn't required to route anything through anyone's bureaucracy and wasn't limited by anyone's political considerations. She shared the file with Dumbledore in September. He looked at it for a long time. Then he said, "This is considerably more comprehensive than what I have." "I know," she said. "I've been listening to things your people don't have access to. Will you share it, the ongoing information, with the Order?" She thought about it. The Order of the Phoenix, Dumbledore's organization, mostly in dormancy since Voldemort's first fall, now being quietly reactivated, was full of people she had varying levels of confidence in. "On a case-by-case basis," she said. "I'll share what's relevant. But I'm not integrating into a structure that reports to you. I have my own judgment and I'm keeping it." He looked at her. "Even when our judgments differ?" "Especially then," she said. He almost smiled. "You are profoundly inconvenient," he said. "You said that before," she said. "It keeps not being a reason to change." She told Harry about the file in October, in a letter, not the details, but that she was tracking things, that the situation was developing, that he should stay aware and not let anyone at school talk him into complacency. His reply came back in 3 days, "Already tracking it from here. Something's changed in the way people talk about him. A year ago it was past tense. Now it's, not future tense, they won't say that, but there's a different quality to the silence. Like something's being avoided. I'm watching." She read it and thought, "Of course you are." In December, Voldemort reformed. Not the full ritual. Not the blood ritual that Pettigrew had been building toward. Something smaller, slower, more painful, Pettigrew improvising with what he had, using dark magic Kara hadn't encountered in any of the books she'd read and had to chase through 3 separate research channels to understand. She felt at the moment it happened. Not heard, felt, in that other sense, the one that had found Harry in the dark over Surrey. Something shifted in the ambient quality of the world, like a fault line moving, and she was in the air over London heading north before she'd consciously decided to go. She didn't get there in time to prevent it. By the time she reached the location in Scotland that her tracking had identified, there was evidence of what had happened and the evidence was unambiguous: Peter Pettigrew's left hand, severed. A ritual circle. A body, weak and barely present but present. Voldemort was back. Not strong. Not the force she'd read about in 30 years of history. A ghost of it, barely a whisper of the power that had terrorized a world, trembling and furious and needing time and nourishment and a proper body before it could be anything truly dangerous again. She stood in the ritual circle and looked at what remained and said, to the empty space, to wherever he was, "You should know something. Whatever you're planning, whatever version of this you think leads to what you want, I'm going to be there. I was there at Hogwarts. I was there at the chamber. I was there when your last plan fell apart." She looked at the ritual marks on the ground. "I know what you are and I know what you need and I know where you're going. So does Dumbledore. So does Harry." She stood in the winter dark in Scotland and felt the specific cold that had nothing to do with temperature. "You had one advantage, before. People were afraid of you. Harry's not afraid of you. I'm not afraid of you. And you've made the mistake of giving us time to prepare." She paused. "Use it wisely." She flew home through a sky that was very dark and very clear and thought about everything she knew and everything she was going to need, and she landed in the garden of the Notting Hill house and sat on the back step and took out a piece of paper and started writing. Not to Harry. Not yet. He was at Hogwarts and the letter she'd need to write to him about this needed to be done properly, with the right words and the right time, not at midnight in a garden. To herself, then. A letter she'd never send, just the organizing of thought into language, the way she'd learned to process things she needed to be clear about. "He's back," she wrote. "Smaller than expected. Slower than planned. But back. Harry is 15 in 3 months. He is extraordinary in ways even Voldemort can't fully account for because Voldemort has been gone for 13 years and Harry didn't exist before he left, not really, not the way he is now. Voldemort's intelligence about Harry is historical, from spies and reports and rumor. He doesn't know who Harry actually is. That's our advantage. There's also this, I've been building something for 8 years. 8 years of choosing, every day, to be the person Harry needed. It turned into something I didn't plan but I'm not sorry for. I'm not going to pretend otherwise, not even in a letter I'll never send. He told me his worst fear is me leaving. Mine, she wrote, and paused. Mine is him not becoming what he already is. Mine is anything, person or prophecy or dark wizard, diminishing what I've been watching grow. He's 15 in 3 months. A year after that, 16. The world can wait. She folded the letter and held it and then let it go, which was not something she did literally but was something she did in a sense that mattered, and then she went inside and went to bed. Somewhere in Scotland, in the ruins of a ritual circle, something ancient and terrible was cold and furious and planning. Kara slept easily anyway.